all right? Let me tell you what's on the agenda. Let me tell you what the agenda is, since we don't have an agenda slide. We're going to talk about HUD and its pieces, all right? Some of the pieces of HUD. We will obviously go through a regulatory agreement, since that's what drives everything. We will talk about REAC and its review process, fast multifamily, what they do, how they do it, what they're looking at, what's important to them. We will touch on the HUD audit guide, a little bit on the HUD audit guide, not so much in Chapter 3, but more into Chapter 2 and the reporting requirements. So we will talk about that as well. We want to touch on the area of changes in ownership, And then also we're going to touch on management agents, their fees, their expenses. And the reason we are touching on some of these areas, changes of ownership, management agents and such, is because QAS, Quality Assurance Subsystem, during the past year has heard from QAS and has heard of some of the areas that they have been having issues in and having been not seeing practitioners basically doing enough work, getting enough documentation. So we want to pass this information along to you so you are able to avoid those mistakes, all right? Today's key word, the winner is, at least for this session. We'll have another one for after break. The key word for the beginning this morning is the hotel casino MGM. MGM is what you get, okay? I'll try to remember to mention that again. We will take a break at around 9:40, coffee break and such, all right? Okay, as I said, my name is Peter Bell. Les didn't introduce me, so my name is Peter Bell. The reason I'm here is I used to work for HUD. First part of my time with HUD, 15 years, I was in the IG's office and I worked on the development of the HUD Consolidated Audit Guide. After a number of years with the IG's office, like about 7 or 8, I went to work for Real Estate Assessment Center, and at the REAC, I was part of QAS for a while, and then I was moved over to Fast PH, and then finally I ended up and finished up my time with them in Fast Multifamily. So that's why I'm here. What else? Questions, ask them at any time. We don't have to wait for this afternoon if you have a burning issue. And I usually say questions, concerns, comments. So that's how we'll do that. All right? Let me think. What else do we want to do? We gave you the word. We know the agenda. All right. We will talk today a lot about requirements, HUD's requirements. Yes, we will hit the regulatory agreement. We will touch on some handbooks. And following the regulatory agreement, we will have our Kahoot quiz. And then following the discussion of management agents and what makes, where do their fees come from and what does HUD say about their fees and, what expenses get charged here versus there. We will also have a second Kahoot quiz on management agents with the appropriate awarding of the money. So there you go. But the requirements, we want to concentrate on what HUD's requirements are for owners and management agents. Because while there is an audit guide, while there is a Chapter 3 of the HUD Consolidated Audit Guide, which is on multifamily properties, it is somewhat old, somewhat outdated. Whereas the requirements and what HUD has put out and what HUD wants, right, has advanced through the years. So while the audit guide has been static, HUD's requirements have continued to change, to advance. So it's always about, and even the audit guide would tell you, you have to be aware of what the latest stuff is that HUD wants, the latest requirements. So that's why today we will talk about requirements, but understand the requirements have moved forward. The audit guide is basically stuck in neutral, if you will, all right? So that's why we talk about requirements. And when you audit, all right, or when you manage a property, all right, it is about HUD's requirements. All right, we will see that time and time and again. So that's the kind of the overall message today. Okay, let us move forward. What is HUD? What is HUD? All right. You see, okay, so okay, this works. So HUD has various pieces to it. All right, so here's our Office of Housing down here. Departmental Enforcement Center, known as the DEC, that was invented at about the same time. We're in Section 6, Session 6, folks. That was invented about the same time as the Real Estate Assessment Center. So we want to be aware of who those are. The Office of Inspector General, what they do, all right, they will go out and audit properties that you also take a look at. The IG's office is also responsible for and able to come out and review your working papers, your audit documentation, so that's what they can do. Public and Indian housing, all right, we want to talk about rental assistance demonstration project, because the RAD project, all right, or the RAD program, will have some effect on housing. HUD did a survey some time ago, and in looking at this, I saw the date when the program got started as 2012. And they discovered that because of things happening in the past, there were some $26 billion in basically backloaded maintenance costs for PIH, public housing authorities. And HUD, you know, to react to this, they decided that they would put a program in place that converted a lot of that capital fund assistance and operating fund assistance from PHAs to Section 8, and try to get these housing authorities to manage their stock of housing, right, more like a multifamily property. The idea was they didn't want to, you know, lose any units, but they were willing to make the investment in the units and move a lot of the units. And their idea, their goal was to move some 445,000 units, 445,000 units over to Section 8. And to date, where we are now, they have done that with about 100,000 units, and they've spent, and the number that they're putting on it is so far, I think, $6 billion. So that's underway as we move units out of PIH and into the kind of the housing model by making their funding Section 8 based. And the idea is that they want to get the buy-in from the PHAs on this. And so the idea for the program is that when they put them under Section 8 contracts, there'll be long-term contracts, guaranteed renewal, so forth and so on. The ownership of the unit stays within either PIH or the PHA or not-for-profit, so they're not coming over to for-profit. And the whole idea behind this is that HUD, and this has always been HUD's more or less thought in this, to keep up, maintain the portfolio, the stock of affordable housing. It's always been, HUD's programs has always been about keeping the stock of affordable housing available and keeping it in good shape and making sure it was there. If you consider any of the housing programs, 232s, 221s, now the 223s, all right? Even the 236s way back when, all right? It's always been about keeping the affordable housing stock available for people, all right? So we see that. So the pieces of HUD, IG, DEC, community planning and development, that tries to keep up the cities. They put money into improving the cities, part of areas of the city through partnerships. And then also I know they do a lot with, they were doing a lot with providing for homeless shelters. All right, within the Office of Housing, multifamily, Office of Healthcare over here on this side, the right-hand side, residential care, these are 232s, all right, and we understand that they're growing, and actually one of the fastest growing areas is the 232s. What do we have up here? Do we have single family up here somewhere? We have single family here for FHA, but then we have all our multifamily stuff over here, Section 8, 202s, 811s, Office of Preservation, mark to market and such. All right, so that's just where how the Office of Housing looks. Let me see if there's anything else we need to say.
Peter, can you go back one slide? I
sure can.
I left my brain back there for a second.
Oh, sorry.
The only thing I would add that you need to really be aware of is the move afoot today. Look, the concern for RD and the concern for HUD is maintaining affordable housing units. Okay, when the new RD guy stepped in, he's an ex-RSM partner, he found he had about 2,500 to 3,000 non-performing RD projects, and his goal was just to whack them. Mm-hmm. But the problem he learned about the deep state really fast, the actual real deep state, which is the people who know all these regulations and say, well, just be careful what you do here, because if you whack all those mortgages, you're going to lose $2,500 rental assistance contracts because they're tied to the loan. Oh, we cannot give up 2,500 affordable housing contracts. Right. The same thing happened in HUD. Where's the biggest problem in housing right now at HUD? Public and Indian housing has really aged stock, and there's no willpower. Look, I do a lot of public housing. I can tell you we could have rebuilt public housing across the country twice with about 6 months' effort in Afghanistan for money. Sorry.
No, I agree.
It could have been.
I'm sorry. What does whack 'em mean?
Whack 'em.
Well, you said they took them and whacked them, and I was like, what did they do? Cut them?
Well, knock them down.
Knock them down.
Oh, okay.
He was gonna find those contracts and call the note due and kill the projects themselves. Get rid of them. That's another bad word. Whack them and kill them.
Yeah, you are in Vegas too long, so.
Well, I probably went to that mob thing, also. So they're going to get, they wanted to get rid of those projects, right? He says, I got all these non-performing assets. What the heck what we're doing? Well, then they taught him really quickly that the minute he did that and fixed those mortgages, he was going to lose $2,500 rental assistance contracts. HUD's got the same problem, 1.2 million units in public housing, some of which is not the most recent stuff. Some people manage well, some people don't. So the goal was to manage affordable housing. What does this chart really tell us? We're in the process of converting up to 1.2 units in public housing into something else, most likely housing. And they'll do that by converting to the multifamily model and giving the subsidy from Section 9, well, that's public housing, and they'll give it to Section 8. And they'll either be project-based vouchers or they will be project-based Section 8 contracts. Right. So you have in the market today a huge influx of new HAP contracts possible. This is a developer's dream world. You marry those new HAP contracts, voucher or PBRA, with a tax credit or something else, and there's a ton of development effort. But the goal from HUD was to maintain affordability. They cannot, and you know this from years, right, Peter? They do not ever want to see a reduction in the affordable housing stock. Therefore, one of my friends here yesterday was going, what's going to happen with those tax credits in the opportunity zones? Well, you're going to sign LURAs with those use agreements. You're going to lock them into like 40 years of low-income housing. Where are you going to get this big bump in valuation? Because they're going to be affordable housing units for the foreseeable future. And that is the whole goal, to lock those down, not lose those, transfer those into housing, essentially.
And
the
just
model.
get them under the model so they're better managed.
And they have more access to capital.
Right. That's right. With the guaranteed contracts, it's like, okay, then you can go to the bank, you can get financing on those, they can be underwritten.
And by the way, sorry, when he said that, the number one play in the market right now, it might be opportunity zones at some level, but the other play is, if you're a Chinese guy and you got gazillions of dollars, where do you want to put it? You don't want to put it in equities. The best thing you can probably do is buy into housing projects that have 80% of their rent guaranteed by the federal government and a mortgage guaranteed by the federal government with no recourse to the owners in general, and so the valuations are sky high. There's just money flowing into this area now, tax credit or otherwise. People love guaranteed money from the federal government on an investment side. Sorry.
Thank you. All right, so HUD's role in housing, we got 3 columns. They play three different roles. The left-hand column, all of our insured loans. So that's HUD as insurer. We're familiar with the 221s, the 236, the old 236. 232s are our nursing homes and such. And then the 223F and the 223A7 are the refinances. It's a refinance of an existing project. And I think 223F, correct me if I'm wrong here, 223F is if they're already a HUD project, but it's just a refi. If it's an A7, it was an existing project that was conventional. It comes in for refi to HUD. So that's HUD as insurer, all right? HUD as insurer. The middle column, direct loans, is HUD as lender. 202s, 811s, the old direct loan 202s supported by Section 8. So now we have new Section 202s. Section 202 is for housing, particularly for whom, please? What type of folk are in 202 projects? Elderly, thank you, Mary. Section 811, Section 811, what type of folks live? Section 811, what type of individuals live in a Section 811 type project? Developmentally disabled, all right. And then these come over a number of years ago, they decided to stop, at least with they converted Section 202s over and then they invented Section 811, and they make them capital advances where HUD puts the money up front, HUD loads the money, and then the regulatory agreement says, well, because you're a not-for-profit, the loan is non-interest bearing, non-amortizing, you maintain it according to our conditions, right? For what, 40 years, and then we're going to forgive the loan anyways. And then it's also supported by something that's in our extreme right-hand column. I didn't want to do that. Let's go back, please. Thank you. PRAC, P-R-A-C, Project Rental Assistance Contract. So PRAC supports the capital advances and takes care of the operating costs for those particular capital advance projects. So the right-hand column is our tenant subsidy. So this is HUD as subsidizer. So we understand the Section 8, the old contracts, the new contracts, PRAC, and then PAC, Project Assistance Contract. And then you could add in the rental assistant demonstration where all these units are moving out of PIH and under the multifamily model. So you could also pencil in RAD because that's where Section 8 will be. So left-hand column, HUD as insurer. Middle column, HUD as banker, lender. HUD insures, HUD lends. HUD takes on what? The risk. HUD is on the hook for these loans, either as insurer or direct lender. They are on the hook. If you take on risk, you want something in hand, all right? Anybody takes on risk should get something in hand that allows you some recourse, all right? Or allows you some control over what's going on, all right? We will talk about how HUD accomplishes that because when HUD puts the money out there, they have rules, they have regulations, they have ideas of how projects are to be run, all right? So we just keep that in mind. We'll get back to that later. So we see these are HUD's three roles: insurer, lender, subsidizer. All right? Go on to the next one. Common program characteristics. Well, the first thing is we see a regulatory agreement. So in order for HUD to protect its risk, all right, and feel comfortable with the entities, the individuals that they have lent money to, let me put this chair here to warn myself that I'm crossing the Great Divide and to stop tripping over this thing. There we go. All right, that's cool. We'll see if that works. All right, so HUD uses the regulatory agreement. We will go through one in a little while. But under the regulatory agreement, it talks about the entity, the organization, the owner, the borrower, paying the mortgage and funding reserves, and what they have to do with the cash. The cash that they receive actually belongs to the project, and the project, we will get to that in a minute, and HUD's idea of what a project is, okay, versus what an owning entity is. And they make that kind of that distinction, if you will, between here's the project, here's the owning entity, and they are definitely not the same. And then it says all cash disbursements must be for what? Reasonable and necessary operating expenses of the property. All right, very important. We will cover that again later on. They say security deposits collected and the assets must equal or exceed the liabilities. So security deposits have always been special to HUD, and so they write into the program regulations and program handbooks how they have to be treated, and so we will see more of that a little bit later. The building must be maintained. After all, the bricks and mortar, this is the thing that is central to, basically that's what HUD would end up with, right? If it all went south, HUD would get the real estate back, so they want to make sure that the building is properly maintained. And so, reserve for replacement, and that there be proper maintenance policies, and that they, inspect the units and so forth and so on. And then finally, they talk about management fees and what goes into the management fee and what the management fee is to cover for the management agent. So management agent gets a fee. How is that fee put together? What does it look like? Where's the various sources of the fee? That's all written out in what? A management agreement that the agent signs with HUD, and yes, there's handbooks and such that talk about this. But all the multifamily programs have some manner of regulatory agreement. But again, we have the regulatory agreement, we have, I mentioned handbooks, there's other agreements, we will talk about those, but essential, once HUD puts its money out there, once it becomes the insurer, once it becomes the lender, and when it is the subsidizer, there is some sort of document that HUD agrees to, right, with the owner, with the borrower, with the owning entity. And again, it all gets back to what does that agreement say about what your client, assuming you have owners as client, borrowers, and entities, right, what they have to do in exchange for HUD's assistance, that federal financial assistance. A little bit more on the mortgage and the funding of the reserves, and kind of your role here. If you are an auditor, your role. It is now, HUD now knows by the 16th of the month who has paid, which owners have paid on the loan and which have not. There is a system called the MDDR system that stands for Multifamily Delinquency and Default Reporting System, and all the lenders report directly to HUD on a monthly basis, right? So it's all electronic. They tell HUD who has missed the mortgage payment, who's late on the mortgage, who's late on the reserve for replacements, and any other reserves that need to be made on a monthly basis. So HUD knows point number one and point number two. The audit that you perform, HUD does not know about point number three, that what happened to all the cash coming into the project and where did it go. HUD does not know about all the cash disbursements and whether they were made for reasonable and necessary operating expenses of the project. HUD does not know where, from just sitting there in Washington, D.C., about the security deposits and whether they're being handled correctly, right? They're not quite sure of the building being maintained, although there is the PASS system, physical assessment subsystem, and they send out their contract inspectors. So they get some idea, but it's not on an annual basis. They can't afford to do that. And then the management fees, HUD doesn't know exactly whether the management fees are being paid properly and then what's being charged against the project. All right? And so while HUD knows about the mortgage and the R for R and then the other funded reserves, they rely on the audit and the auditor for all these other items. All right, so just where do you come into the picture? That's the idea. And so the idea of the audit is kind of focused on areas that HUD doesn't really know about already. All right, just some dollars, numbers of units, amounts, the various loan types. So there's an array of all our multifamily programs from 207 down to the risk sharing. And my takeaway from this is, a number of years ago, the chart, the table would not have looked like this. You'd have found a whole lot of money in the 221D4, of course. That's where tons of it was, and there was probably more. Well, there's 232s, and I don't see 236s on there, so there would have been some in 236. But the increase, right, in the 223F, the refis is what stands out. So that's, let me see, where are we? Actually, the refis have now, in both number of units, right, and the total amount has now exceeded the 221D4s. What that tells me is, due to the number of refis, there's a whole lot of owners out there, when they refied, all right, they either came into HUD and had not been into HUD, or they had already been in, say, the HUD portfolio, but now went through a refinance. They've actually taken on one of the newer regulatory agreements. And so now there are more things for the owner to pay attention to, because HUD is regulating more of that operation. All right, so there's the dollars, number of units being funded, either insured or being lended on, or what have you. So the takeaway is, more folks in through refis that the regulatory environment might be new to them, or the regulatory environment has increased for them if they came out of an old 221D4 and an old regulatory agreement. This is the operating environment. Just take a look at it. It's got a lot of pieces to it. Here's our project up there in the middle, kind of the castle building itself. All right, so here's our project right there, with the wall surrounding the castle, and then the moat. There you are right there. Okay, that's where you are. On the drawbridge with a briefcase. But then you see the cash coming out, and you see all the places that the cash goes to. All right? See all the places the cash goes to. Could be in surplus cash up here. That's the owner carrying around. Some goes to vendors, some to the agent. Here's the bank down here. So we see our dollar bill here with the feet, and it's running in all manner of directions. And then there is this thing, reasonable operating expenses. We will talk more about this in a bit, all right, and the relationship between all of these pieces. But then let's go back to our castle wall, all right? And this is our regulatory agreement. It is protecting the castle. And we see the lookout person up here as the Real Estate Assessment Center, and then we could probably say one or two of these fellows up here were part of the DEC, Departmental Enforcement Center. They all play a part, all right? And this is HUD's idea of how it protects its investment. It insured the loan, or it lent the money for the loan, right? And so this is the idea of HUD protecting its investment. And the main protection, as far as I'm concerned, is this regulatory agreement, the wall, right? And then the REAC folk and maybe the DEC. And then you kind of see straddling the drawbridge over the moat, there's your role right there. There you are right there. All right, so just a picture, kind of put it into your mind. Reorganization. When I started with HUD, there were 10 regions. Now there's 5. And the idea is with the restructuring and then internally downsizing, and between the restructuring and the downsizing, sometimes when you call for an answer, you may not get anyone to pick up the phone. And so the people that you may have talked to for years and years and kind of your go-to people, they're not there anymore. And it is a sad state of affairs as a former HUD person that the institutional knowledge has kind of gotten we'll just say way watered down. And so where do you go for decent information on HUD anymore? Well, you're here, and Les does his best to provide that to you. But there you see wherever you are, where the offices are, and then where the asset manager or the account executive for HUD is, that is has your particular project or your particular client in his or her portfolio that they have to watch over. All right, so there has been change. I remember when I heard Les give this presentation before, he said the primary thing is the system and the staff is coming in second at this point. And I kind of believe that. They kind of got more reliant on systems than staff, and that institutional knowledge just went away. So let's talk about our operating concepts. There we go, operating concepts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Operating expense reasonableness, and this was an area that has been pinpointed by Quas. In one of their reviews, obviously they questioned the CPA firm as to, well, how did you determine the reasonableness? All right. What was this compared to? Reasonable as compared to what or whom? All right. And so where does one look for that? And when you read the regulatory agreement, when you look in various HUD handbooks, it always talks about disbursements being made only for reasonable and necessary operating expenses of the project. And so one must be careful when saying, okay, it is reasonable. Again, reasonable compared to what? And unfortunately, HUD does not put out any guidance as to, well, in this particular region, say in the Southeast or the Northeast or the Midwest, what is a reasonable cost? And I always thought that when a reasonable cost, just as guidance was, and I'll pick on Sioux Falls, South Dakota. if the project is in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, they should not be paying New York prices to replace the roof or for a maintenance contract or something like that. So, and especially when we have identity of interest between management agents and, shall we say, their maintenance companies or their vendors, one has to be extra careful. So just that word there. And then the frontline, we'll talk more about frontline issues and frontline staff and how the frontline staff are paid versus central office staff, how they're paid and where that gets charged to when we get further on down the line on management agents. Let's see. So my note says Quash found significant weaknesses in basically, how that reasonableness determination was made. Yeah, so we'll just leave that one there. So that's one of the issues that Quash has found in the past. All right, let's talk about the project operating environment. So thinking back to, all right, so we have owning entity versus project. So I mentioned before, when HUD refers to the project, they mean the bricks and mortars. All right, that to them is the project. Owning entity to HUD is not the project. Owning entity is the ownership group, the LLC, the partnership, the not-for-profit. They are the owning entity. All right, so we make that distinction. And that distinction is, was in the mind of HUD, and it's in the literature as well. Relationship between owner and agent. All right, we are now, considering whether the owner is the management agent and what the relationship, and HUD understands this, and HUD allows this, and HUD allows there to be an identity of interest between the owner and the agent, okay? So HUD just wants to know about it. And then you have to understand that, you have to know about it, so then that adds what? That adds risk to the engagement. When the particular engagement, when the owner owns the management company, and then we get down to the next piece, services provided by the agent. How many services are they providing? When are they using their own vendors to do that? Do they own the carpet company, the cleaning company, the snow removal, the grass cutting, the fuel oil? What else is out there? Insurance? Is there anything else that I missed? Examples? HUD understands that. You have to understand that. You have to understand that this is another risk point. So when the agent, right, basically uses their own vendors to do the maintenance and other issues, right, painting and decorating and what have you, at the project, this increases the risk in the engagement. And then the requirement in the handbook is that this be disclosed, and it's also mentioned in where? The audit guide, that when you come upon this particular situation, it needs to be disclosed, and you have to be aware of those disclosures, and then it also brings into process what? Additional suggested audit procedures in the guide that says if there is an identity of interest between owner and agent, agent and vendors, there's extra work to be done. Okay, next point, entity cash versus project operating cash. The project operating cash is what is generated by the project assets, whatever they may be. It's rent, it's cell phone towers, it's laundry income, whatever it is, okay? Entity cash is that is the cash that belongs to the owning entity. HUD is interested in it, right? Doesn't necessarily require you to report it, right? But HUD is interested in entity cash, especially from year to year when entity cash increases. Where did that increase come from? That's what HUD and the Real Estate Assessment Center, Fast Multifamily, they are interested in when that occurs. But the thing that HUD really focuses on is the project operating cash. The regulatory agreement talks about what happens to it, where it goes, what it can be used for, how it has to be accounted for, all right? So the real focus from HUD is on the project operating cash, all right? And what does it say? As the insurer lender on the loan, HUD wishes to protect the bricks and mortar as well as project assets, both cash and non-cash. So insurer lender, HUD, we talked about the risk earlier. So for taking on that risk, HUD wants to what? Protect the asset, the bricks and mortar, watch what happens to the cash, doesn't want any cash leaking out of the project, all right? And the way cash leaks out of the project is owners, agents, vendors, that type of thing, all right? So HUD keeps all this in mind. Let's go back and take a look at our castle. Where's our castle? Where's the castle? There we are. All right, so cash comes out of the project, goes up to surplus cash, and then it's paying vendors, it's paying the agent, loan payments are being made, reserve for replacement deposits are being made. All right, so this is how HUD sees that cash. It's going in many directions, and so it is concerned about, all right, how surplus cash is determined. It's concerned about what goes on between the owner and the agent, right, and then agent and vendors. All right, so that's that operating environment or the operating environment concepts. All right, and it comes from what the regulatory agreement says, what the handbooks say. It's also covered in part by the audit guide. All right, let's move on. All right, project operating environment. Hierarchy of HUD requirements. Okay, so now we will talk about HUD requirements. Basically, we have the regulatory agreement, a use agreement, and I always kind of tie use agreements to 236 or 236 decoupled projects or something like that. We had something in line called the use agreement, and to me, a use agreement was kind of a mini regulatory agreement. And the regulatory agreement, we know, has changed over time, and so we'll get into that, we'll talk about that. We have subsidy contracts, and whereas the regulatory agreement and a use agreement are pretty much standard, a subsidy contract, at least a while ago, there'd be a lot of different examples of a subsidy contract, and not all subsidy contracts were the same, and some had different requirements than others. So the idea is, yeah, you get a regulatory agreement, you understand use agreement, but the subsidy contract, you really have to read that since they move and they float and they are different from project to project, you have to actually look at and pay attention to what's included in a particular subsidy contract. Underneath that, we see HUD program handbooks, housing notices, and mortgagee letters. All right, the regulatory agreement, once established, it stays out there. It has a pretty long life. Same for use agreements, same for subsidy contracts. HUD issues program handbooks that give the detail, this at least in the old days, gave the detail of a particular issue. And then when they wanted to really dive down into the weeds and address something of a current nature without having to revise a whole handbook, they put out housing notices. And so it might have been a housing notice on one particular subject. Back a few years, they put out a housing notice on how Section 8 was to be treated, and the use of surplus cash, and residual receipts and things like that, if you were not for profit. Other housing notices went out when they lifted the audit requirements on the smaller projects. They did it via housing notice. When they said, oh, if the federal financial assistance is less than $500,000, you don't have to have an audit. This was for for-profits. All right, they did it via housing notice. All right, so kind of the hierarchy of where the requirements are. All right, so now we will talk about our newest regulatory agreement, and we'll spend some time talking about that. All right, so the history is there was a 4-page agreement that dated from about 2002. It was rather basic stuff and just more or less had the base requirements in there. And again, you see, it was mostly designed for the 221D4 program. And then in 2011, a new regulatory agreement came out that vastly expanded what the requirements are, and they expanded the number of pages, so it included a lot more material. And then in 2014, the current version came out. So it went from 4 pages to 34 pages to about 34 or 35 pages. All right? In looking at it and trying to figure out what they're trying to do, they expanded the regulatory agreement for basically one basic reason, or maybe two. The old regulatory agreement that was 4 pages was very basic stuff. The HUD program handbooks had all the detail in it, right? The regulatory agreement, your client signed the regulatory agreement. They did not sign the HUD handbook. HUD handbook was just program stuff. HUD asset managers, HUD project managers, whatever you want to call them. The feeling through HUD was, oh, the program handbooks, those are all requirements. Well, when owners and agents violated the handbook, HUD was trying to bring them to task. But smart owners and agents got smarter attorneys and said, my client never signed your handbook. They signed the regulatory agreement. And what my client did was okay under the regulatory agreement. Maybe it didn't square too well with your handbook, but it was okay under the regulatory agreement. So HUD decided to expand the regulatory agreement. And so everything in HUD handbooks and housing notices and any policy that they thought about walking up and down the hallways at HUD got jammed up into the regulatory agreement, and that's why it grew so much. And that's why there's an unconscionable level of detail in the thing. We're going to look at it and see what which parts changed, but to my thinking, that's why. HUD got basically outmaneuvered a number of times and by having a simple, basic 4-page regulatory agreement. And the idea was, we need a stronger document. And so when I mentioned all these refis through the 223s that happened, a lot of those owners are moving from the older regulatory, simpler regulatory agreements into these the longer, more complex, more restrictive one. And when I read it the first time, I said, well, hell, that used to be in a handbook, but now it's up here. Oh, that used to be in a handbook, but now it's up here. All right? So that's part and parcel of why this thing was done, just to kind of, tighten things down. So where are we here? All right. So it's now much longer, and it applies to more folks. There's a big section on definitions where it wasn't there before. In the 2014 version, changes to the reserve for replacement and changes to residual receipts. Other changes that it says that may turn out to be more important than you think. We will go over those. We will definitely hit those. And so, any questions on the regulatory agreement? I'm going to switch over to the regulatory agreement now and start walking us through it and just highlighting some of the portions. It is not in your materials. We'll have to watch it on the screen, but it's not in your materials. But it is, of course, available out there in the HUD library. So any questions on regulatory agreement before we flip over to it? No? All righty. See if I can find it here. All right, so this is the newest regulatory agreement. Let's just kind of go down a little bit. It talks about which programs are we talking about, 207, 221, D4s, D3s, 223s, and so forth and so on. So an insured project. And you see down in the lower right-hand corner, down here, the doc number, if you want to, if you're searching for it out on the HUD library, that's what it is, 92466M. They all have the 92466. You just make sure you have to find the right one. All right, we will stop at places that I have highlighted. And the first one I want to show you is this here right on the front page, residual receipts rider. So we know from our experience, the folks that residual receipts apply to are two kinds of owners. Who are they? Not-for-profit and limited distribution projects. So they must what? Set aside, they have a residual receipts, they keep track of residual receipts if it's there, right? If it's part of surplus cash. Okay, so they have that. So it says, does this agreement need a residual receipts rider, yes or no? And the idea is, and if you look at the difference, this is the 2014 version. It says down there June 14, right? If you look at this one versus 2011, the 2011 version at the bottom says, okay, is this entity for-profit, limited distribution, or is it a not-for-profit? That part is gone. The assumption is that over time, not-for-profits will basically not go away, but they will sign this as well, and they can participate in distributions. So this is the idea. And then if you look, when we get to definitions, there is no longer a definition under definitions of a what? Nonprofit owner. That's been taken out. So I think the idea from HUD is, in time, not-for-profits will be able to take a distribution, and they will do it. It won't be necessary to have what? Residual receipts. So we get that idea. You more or less have to figure out whether there is a residual receipts rider necessary for this or no. Here's the definitions. Okay, it starts off, very long definitions section. Let's center this up here. That's good. Definitions. Forgot to stop on, see if there's anything up here Oh, okay. So we'll just have to go down slowly. I want to get to mortgaged property. So they define mortgaged property. It's a very long definition. Mortgaged property means all of the borrower's present and future right, title, and interest, right, to any and all of the following. All right, so we got land, improvements, fixtures. All current and future rights, including air rights, development rights. All right, and the idea is that, remember, any revenue produced from the mortgage property is considered to be what? Project cash. So this says current and future rights, air rights. So you sell the air rights, or you lease them out, or whatever it is. All right, then that's use of a what? Project asset. That equals project cash. Number 7, all awards, payments, and other compensation made or to be made by any government authority. So anything that comes in. What else? Thought there was something else in here. All forfeited, thank you. Tenant security deposits under any lease. A good while ago, The IG's office went out and did a couple of reviews of owners. And they identified some owners who, when tenant security deposits were forfeited, basically claimed that as their money, when in fact it should have stayed in the project. So I think, and they put that in the audit guide at one point, and they said, oh, that's, equity skimming and that's a fraud indicator. And so somehow that found its way into here. Yes, sir, Tim? States, well, is that in there? Forfeited, that may go with it, yeah. And then how long does it take to get it back, or does it goes to the state for them? Okay. Well, if state law, I would say if state law would, take precedence over this, because we know that for security deposits, you pay attention to what the local jurisdiction is. I mean, HUD's got its rules, its guidance, but you have to pay attention to local jurisdiction. So forfeited tenant security deposits, awards, payments, settlements, or other compensation resulting from litigation involving the project, all right? So HUD is then, reaching out, all right, and grabbing off new stuff. All right, the highlighted thing down here, borrower may hold non-project funds in separate segregated accounts. This is entity cash. So this is within the regulatory agreement. It is recognizing there's such a thing as entity cash. May hold non-project funds in separate segregated accounts specifically labeled as non-project funds, and they are not part of the mortgaged property, all right? So it still allows that there is, and so it mentions here in the regulatory agreement about such a thing as entity cash. What's a program obligation? All applicable statutes and any regulations issued by the Secretary. And it says, including all amendments as they become effective. So this reaches out into the future. This doesn't, restrict the regs and statutes that are in effect over this owner and the project to just what's in. I'm still here. Okay. What's in effect on the day they sign the regulatory agreement. So this reaches out into the future as they become effective. Item number 2, all current requirements in HUD handbooks, guides, notices, and mortgagee letters that apply to the project and all future updates, changes, and amendments thereto as they become effective, all right? So again, reaching out into the future. The old regulatory agreements didn't do this, all right? So this is, all right? Let me see, blah, 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 blah. Oh, upon completion of the rulemaking process. Let me step back and just kind of explain a little bit. I will say back in the day when REAC and HUD-IG were asked, now this talks about the single audit compliance supplement, so this is just a story about that. So what you do is when you as an agency want to amend something under a program in the single audit compliance supplement, you put together your recommendations, and the idea was you forward them up to OMB. And OMB looks at them and they more or less bless them or reject them, and that's what ends up in the compliance supplement for the coming year. And there was a fellow, and I knew him, his name is Terry Ramsey. He's not working there as an employee anymore. But his idea was, if it had to have been more or less signed off on by an owner before he would permit it to be part of the compliance supplement. So if you think about regulatory agreements were signed by owners, handbooks were not. So if HUD generated something and sent it up that was only in a handbook, he would say, well, did it go through the rulemaking process? Did it get vetted to the outside? Did the public have a chance to comment on it? And you'd go, well, no, it's in a handbook. Everybody knows this. It's what we do. And he'd say, no, it's not going it's not making its way into the compliance of it because you are trying to have an entity live by something they didn't get a chance to A, comment on, or B, even sign as a requirement. So what this is saying is the same thing. Upon completion of the rulemaking process, these things then affect your client, all right? So they're signing this regulatory agreement, and they are also agreeing to be bound by however these things change going into the future. So these are some of, they are agreeing to things, and they don't even realize how much they're agreeing to, all right? Reasonable operating expenses. Unfortunately, this thing is kind of short. It means the reasonable expenses and payments that arise from the purchase of goods, services, which are exclusively used for the operation, maintenance, and routine repair of the project. So it says exclusively used, including all payments and deposits required under the agreement, the note, or the security instrument. So it'd be nicer if it gave you something on reasonable, but that's more about anything, all claims that you are making as expenses better have gone for the project. They give us a definition of waste: failure to keep the mortgage property in decent, safe, and sanitary condition and good repair, and then a laundry list of what that actually means. All right, construction financing. We won't stop on that. No accounting requirements, thank you. All right, financial management. First one, reserve for replacement. Borrower shall establish and maintain a reserve for defraying certain costs of replacing. All right, so we know that. Reserve for replacement shall be deposited with a lender, all right, federally insured, guaranteed by a federal agency, so forth and so on. Then the normal language, deposit a monthly amount, and it's specified. But then it says, at least every 10 years, starting from the date of the initial or final endorsement of the note, and more frequently if HUD wants it, submit to HUD a written analysis of its use of the R for R during the prior 10 years and the projected use of the R for R in accordance with program obligations. So this was, I'm trying to remember if it was in the 2011 version, but at least we see it here. All right, so that's kind of like you look at and give a written analysis for the past 10 years and then some sort of what? Capital needs assessment going forward, right? All right, so that's what HUD wants. Now, we're not 10 years out on this yet, so. Disbursements from the R for R shall only be made after consent in writing. So this hasn't changed. We know that we need to get HUD's agreement, right, before withdrawal is made out of the R for R. What else? Encumbrances. All right. Deposit all rents and other receipts of the project, including equity, capital contributions, all right, under the firm commitment. In the name of the project, so that's always been there, in a federally insured depository. Okay, good. Such funds shall only be withdrawn in accordance with the provisions of this agreement for reasonable operating expenses of the project or for distribution of surplus cash or as a reimbursement of advances when it's permitted. All right, so we get to advances in a little bit. All right, so this is how cash is treated. It comes in from rents and other receipts. Where does it go? Into an account in the name of the project in an insured depository. So we have seen what? Reserve for replacements is a required account. Now we have the project operating account. Somewhere along the line we'll come across security deposit, and that'll be another account. As part of encumbrances section, it says penalties, including but not limited to delinquent tax penalties and civil money penalties, shall not be paid from the project. In other words, from the building, from the project as a thing. I won't want to say as an entity. So this is saying any penalties basically get paid with what? Entity cash. So the entity, the owning entity, if there's a type of penalty, they talk about tax delinquent penalties or a civil money penalty, you do not use what? Project operating cash for that. That is clearly an expense of the owning entity. That's the point of this. Now, before, that wasn't anywhere, right? And so I'm sure some owners were out there using project cash to pay for this, pay for these things. But HUD says, no, can't do it. Security deposits, I didn't highlight it, but it says, shall be kept separate and apart from other projects. So this is a third account, if you will. So we have operating, reserve for replacements, and now security deposits. Now we get down to surplus cash. Calculated as of the last day of the 6th month of the fiscal year, if in fact your client can make semi-annual distributions of surplus cash. But it's basically the last day of the accounting period for the fiscal year, or the last day of the 6th month. And then the other thing, and then we know that there were changes in this, in how this is written up. So one of the things that gets deducted, here's a list of all the deductions that come out or you must account for when determining surplus cash. Anything due or required to be repaid within the calendar year following the date, within the calendar month, excuse me. So the first month following the date of which surplus cash is calculated. It used to say what? The first day of the month, but now it just says the entire month. And what is included in that? Including without limitation, principal, interest, mortgage insurance, premium deposits, deposits to R for R, and any other reserves and tax and insurance escrow deposit. So the calculation now for surplus cash, if in fact your client has this newer agreement rather than the old one, is more extensive. There are more things set aside, thus reducing what? The amount of surplus cash available, all right, whenever it's being calculated, the end of the year or at the end of the 6th month. And it says down here, all other obligations of the project payable within the next 30 days. That was always in there, even from day one, going back to the earliest regulatory agreement. That always says whatever needs to go out within the next 30 days. So those are like trade accounts payable, right? But the inclusion of principal, interest, MIP, tax and insurance, escrow deposits, that's all new for this particular regulatory agreement. Distributions. No distribution may be made or taken from borrowed funds. That has always pretty much been in the regulatory agreement. That wasn't a change. What's changed is paragraph B. That's new. No distribution shall be made or taken when either necessary services, and then it lists out all the types of services, are not provided on a regular basis. Then it goes into notices of physical repairs or deficiencies, and wherever they may come from, HUD, governmental authorities, a lender. So the idea is, if services are not being provided for the project, and we see what kind, or if there are physical repairs or deficiencies, no distributions. And remember the teaching, or at least the thought, is that there shouldn't be any distributions if the project has a pass physical assessment subsystem score from their most recent inspection below 60. If they failed the inspection, they failed their most recent inspection, there should not be a distribution. The idea in HUD's mind is that money should be made to what? Repair, correct deficiencies, or whatever. What else we got? More, still on distributions, must be taken out of the appropriate project account as specified by HUD within the accounting period. Oh, okay, good. I know why I put this for a highlight. So this has to do with, all right, so you have surplus cash. Well, when do you take that? and it says must be taken out of the appropriate project account. If it's surplus cash, then it's still sitting in the operating account. Within the accounting period immediately following the computation of surplus cash, prior to the next calculation of surplus cash, and if not taken within the identified period, the funds remain as mortgaged property and may only be used as permitted by this agreement. So if your client does not take that distribution, as determined by surplus cash, if it's there, during the accounting period, then at the end of that accounting period, the surplus cash designation, it loses, whatever that dollar amount is, it loses its identity. And it's just, again, it falls back into operating funds and goes through the next calculation. All right. Yeah, let's just leave it at there. I can't remember the term for it, but that was good that and again, this is new. This was the stuff that was just in the minds of HUD project managers. And at the REAC, yeah, we all knew this, but it never said that. All right? So the idea is it loses its identity if you don't take it soon enough. Borrower advances. Pretty common that a borrower would have to advance money to the project. It means any advance of funds or a loan to the project made by a borrower or an affiliate for whatever reason. If they go out and they're paying operating expenses, management agent pays operating expenses, that is an advance, okay? That is an advance. Borrower advances must be deposited in the project's operating account as required by program obligations. They may only be repaid, right? And they can accrue interest, that's wonderful. They can only be repaid, from surplus cash. Prior written approval of HUD, okay, and there must be available surplus cash to do that. Item D, repayments of advances shall be considered reasonable operating expenses. They give us the definition of an undocumented expense, an expense without sufficient documentation that provides reasonable identification of the basis of the expense. All right? And the idea about the conclusion of that paragraph, the accounts and records. Okay, we're still here. Available to instructions by HUD during normal business office hours. Okay, so all that still goes. That was around before. We all know about 90 days. That's the annual financial report. Let's see what else is in here. Project management. All right, so this wasn't in there before. Preservation and management, maintenance of the mortgage property. If there was anything in there on project management and maintenance, it was very brief, all right? So greatly expanded, right? And again, we're seeing things included in here, and there's more later about stuff that's in there that is like, why is that in there? Borrower shall not commit waste, shall not abandon the mortgage property, shall restore or repair promptly, all right? So forth and so on. By executing this agreement, borrower agrees and understands that the obligations above are absolute and unconditional, or not limited by any conditions precedent, and are not contingent on HUD's performance of any admin or contractual obligations. Furthermore, HUD is in no way obligated to provide funding or any financial assistance of any kind to borrower to repair, rehab, maintain, or make improvements. So the idea is, all right, insuring the loan is all HUD really wants to do for your client. And HUD is not an ATM. So if something happens at the project, don't keep coming back to HUD saying, we need this, we want that. All right, so this is the idea. And this was not in there before. So I think the idea was that when something bad happened to the project, an owner would come and say, well, we got all these Section 8 tenants in there, and if we can't repair the project, or you don't give us enough money to do this, that, they'll be on the street. So HUD wanted to kind of, put down in writing what the playing field was. They include something in there on management agents, and HUD's sole discretion. They may require replacement of the management under any circumstances. It says here, fees will be computed and paid in accordance with HUD requirements. We'll show some requirements later. Oh, we're not going to read this, but in a regulatory agreement, it has a section on tenant organizations. This was never there before. So it's like HUD is really trying to cover the waterfront, right? With everything that they have in there. They're leaving more or less no stone unturned. And the same thing, you go down and you look at admissions and occupancy. There is a whole HUD handbook on occupancy, right? Everything about occupancy that could possibly you want to know for any particular program. And yet they are taking some of those items and sticking them in the regulatory agreement. Again, your client signs it, so that's the deal. They want the client to have signed and agreed to all this stuff, regardless of what it is. Tenant selection and occupancy, I mean, that's definitely handbook stuff. Actions requiring prior written approval of HUD. Some of these were in the regulatory agreement, some were not. But here they are now in the older agreement. So it says convey, assign, transfer, pledge, hypothecate, encumber, or otherwise dispose of the mortgage property or any interest therein. So basically anything your client wants to do dealing with the project in any way assigning or transferring or encumbering. So to sell it, to bring in a new partner, demo part of it, anything like that. This is HUD's way of saying you can't do that until you get our permission, right? Now, are there unauthorized loans taken out on a project? Yes, it's one of the things you're supposed to be looking for during the engagement, all right? Or are there unauthorized TPA, transfer of physical assets? That's what HUD's terminology is when the sale of a project, a transfer of physical assets. All right, do those happen? Yes. How they happen is a mystery to me, but they happen. All right, so this is HUD saying this project, this bricks and mortar, and the rents and the reserves is all we have. We have taken all the risk by insuring this loan, or we've taken all the risk by making this loan. And so the idea is HUD needs to protect this particular asset because it's all they got, all right, all they got. So this is where they lay out all the things that your client must get permission to do. So one of the things they need permission for is it says to amend the organizational documents of the borrower in a way that materially modifies the terms of the organization, including but not limited to any amendment that activates the requirement that a HUD previous participation certification be obtained from any additional partner or member. We will talk about this in changes of ownership. But here they're saying is anything that they do, if they have to take in a partner or anything or amend the organizational form or the documents, HUD wants to know about it because HUD wants to do what they call a previous participation review of any new person or entity or organization coming into that particular project. All right, we will talk more about this later, but I just wanted to point it out in the reg agreement. Yes, ma'am.
So if the organizational documents are changed to accommodate all the new tax provisions of these partnerships and So if the organizational documents are changed to bring us into line with the new tax laws, partnership responsibilities that are being presented now, does HUD need those documents? They don't have to approve anything like that, I wouldn't think. We're basically changing the responsibilities for partnerships and how the tax penalties and other things that may come into play with the new tax laws.
Les? Did you hear that one? I would say probably not, however.
You're going to get a few slides here in a minute later where I think we would argue that in this particular case, the answer to that would likely be no. And when it gets there, we'll have that conversation. HUD has issued new rules out of a housing notice 2016-14, which is kind of weird. It's the same as the ASU. Doing
Yeah.
completely different things. But I think if you look at that, my answer is probably trending towards no, but on the other side, always err on the side of caution, let them know. They get the chance to say yes or no. I might just send it over to them. But if ownership hasn't changed by more than 25% and change of control is not in place, typically we're going to say no to that.
Right.
But you never know. But when he gets there, we'll have that.
Right. And my advice was, if anything, this goes back even prior years and pre this, if there was any sort of change in the organization, in ownership, regardless of how minor or for whatever reason, at least notify HUD. I don't say you have to wait on permission, but at least shoot them something and notify them saying, hey, we sent it to you. You didn't do anything with it, but we sent it to you. All right, so it says enforcement. We won't go in there, but it talks about that, what the enforcement, declaration of default. What else we got? Compliance with laws. I'm looking for section 50, section 50. Oh, come on, where'd you go? Okay, all right, so section 9, Roman numeral 9, non-recourse. So this is about non-recourse debt, and so that's why this thing is so nice. So let's talk about, let's see what it says on non-recourse debt. Well, first it says each signatory below hereby certifies that each of their statements and reps contained in this agreement and all other supporting documentation thereto are true, accurate, complete. Okay, so we got that part. Describe the property, okay. Section 50 addendum. The loan is non-recourse, and it says each individual / entity, and they're called a Section 50 party, as identified below and in the firm commitment. Now, this is what Les was talking about in that housing notice 1614. Issued to the lender, which means commitment, and any amounts there too. Okay, so it says the loan is non-recourse. Each individual or entity does not assume personal liability for payments due under the note or for payments to the R for R or for matters not under its control, provided that each Section 50 party, so those organizations, those individuals that signed the firm commitment, all right, shall be personally liable under this agreement only with respect to the matters hereafter. A, for funds or property coming into their hands, right, that they're not entitled to retain. For authorizing conveyance, assignment, so for what? Things we just talked about, changing the organizational structure or selling the property, or pledging pieces of it, or encumbering it, taking out loans, or disposing of it, all right? So they are liable for that. So they are liable, not for the loan, not for R for R, but any funds coming into their hands, and also liable if they do any of the stuff under point B, convey, assign, pledge, encumber. And then the kind of the last sentence here, over here. The obligations of each Section 50 party shall survive any foreclosure proceedings, any sale, any delivery, all right? Any termination of the regulatory, wow.
Peter,
Yes, sir.
we skipped C. I think you just
Want
walked
me
by
to do
C.
C. Oh, here we are, over here. So they are liable what? For its own acts, deeds, or acts and deeds of others, which it authorized in violation of the provisions of this Section 50 addendum. So if they authorized any of the B or A stuff, all right, they're still liable for it. So the idea is that as the signer of the firm commitment and as a Section 50 party, that individual, that entity, not liable for the debt, that's liable for R, but their own personal acts that violate any of the terms here in this section, they are in fact liable for, all right? And we will talk more about change of ownership further on down the line. But Les wanted me to make sure that we included this in there, all right? All right, that is the regulatory agreement. That's the regulatory agreement. I think we're breaking at what, 9:40?
Yep.
Yes, sir? All right.
Yes.
Then I tell you what, we will work in the Kahoot quiz now. Where's the old Kahoot quiz? I had it here. Oh, it was that? Come here, get out of there.
Go ahead, click on it again.
Thank you.
Click on that.
Oh, here we go. Classic Kahoot. Ready to join. Does it just do its, oh, okay, here we go. All right, there's our game pin number, 558457. You know how to do these? 558457. I wrote it down the other day because I forgot the pin number.
It used to have keep the pin on the screen, but now the pin only stays on each individual's phone. So you might, if you lose out, if you disconnect for some reason, your neighbor will have the pin on their app. But
How many folks do we need?
we got over 120 yesterday.
Okay, all right.
It's coming up pretty fast.
Ooh, I saw impeach Trump. Rough night. Very good. Urban Devil. Oh, that wasn't nice. Les's lap dance? Come on. Jeez. Vegas baby. Yikes. Still waking up. Thank you.
Are you waiting for me to do the lap dance? Is that what it is?
Buckeye Nation. Okay.
Get out the money. Get out the money.
That's it.
I'll probably find a G-string somewhere.
Skin game. Oh, HUD or bust. Yikes.
See? See, that's what happens when you start playing with Les.
Tua for Heisman.
Somebody
that's
did create creative on my name one day. They said, less spark, more fire. And I thought, yeah, see?
Ooh, mind the gap.
bad
I like
puns.
That. Mind the gap. Make America great again. I assume that's what MAGA means. Blah, blah. Okay. Yikes.
That's a joke.
Okay, now I've increased the size here a little bit. I get some concerns from people in the back row, near the back, that you maybe couldn't see the questions, so I tried to make it a little bigger today.
All right, so these are questions, what we have, 15 questions?
15 questions.
15 questions, regulatory agreement, and then what? 3 of which, 12, and then 3 trivia?
3 trivia.
And the trivia is what?
I have no idea.
Okay, great. So it's not HUD-related trivia.
No, I don't think so.
Vegas-related trivia? Okay.
Every game's different. I have no idea. It's random. Well, to me, it's random.
Okay, okay. All right, let us get underway. Okay? Go. Here we are. Yes, we're ready. Which regulatory agreement version requires SCC
Surplus cash computation
to include R for R payable in the next month? You have your dates. I know we mentioned
Is that
it.
seeable back here?
Okay. Wow.
100%.
100%. I'm awesome. Hooray for me. Okay, I quit now. I'm going home. I'm going to drop the mic. Very, very good. Very good. Right. 2011 and 2014 both included R for R payable in the next month. But there were still differences between 2011 and 2014. We just didn't ask about them yet. That's all. All right. Ready to roll. Oh, let's see. O'Doyle rules. Wow. Bunched at the top. Look at that. 30 points separate the top 5. Very good. And remember, we are awarding to the top 5. D, I need money. Les's lap dance. Oh, look at that. That's very nice. Okay. Hey, Les.
What?
Number 4.
Yeah, I know. I'm hoping for trivia to knock him off that top 5. I'd like to banish those thoughts from my mind or those images, whatever.
All HAP contracts contain specific compliance requirements related to security deposits. Yes or no? True, false? All HAP contracts. All HAP contracts. 3, 2, 1. And ooh. Whoa. Wow.
Read them and weep, folks. Read them and weep. It's about 50-50. You read those HAP contracts. If it doesn't tell you you have to do something with security deposits, you're relying totally on state law. So
somewhere in my early schooling, they said, anytime that true-false question has an all in it, be careful. Oops, what happened? Oh, we're still here. Okay. All right, let's see what I did to the scores. All right.
hey, what did we get rid of? Yes, I'm happy now, right?
Okay. All right, so a spread of around 400, so that opened it up a bit. Okay. One can find the borders of the Mojave Desert because of what indicator species? Wow. What indicator species? So we got animals and we got plants. That's nice. I did not come up with this one. And the right answer is Joshua Tree. So the Joshua Tree outlines the Mojave Desert.
Who knew?
Who knew? I did not.
Who cares? But now you know.
Well, the maker of the puzzle cared, so there. Okay, Berlin, wow, SMO. That looks like, oh, Pirate Carnival's back. That looks like an entire replacement. We got a new 5. That's great. That's lovely. Which of the following items does not belong in project cash? Does not belong in project cash. Okay? Capital contribution for partner tax payments does not belong in project cash. Everything else, right, would belong in there. Cable sign-up bonus, funds received mineral rights. So use of project assets means project cash. Okay? Let's see what it did. So majority of you got that right. That's good. SMO was on top, or was it number 2? Easy Sub, Indigo Montoyo. That's a great one.
Are you playing, Kathy? Easy Sub's playing. Are you playing?
KPMKE. Okay, back and M Davenport. Very good. Okay, what do we got? A spread of about 550. Okay. Coming up. Excess non-critical repair escrow goes to, excess non-critical repair escrow goes to which account?
Be careful here. This probably ends up being more of a trick than I intended.
So it's your trick, not my trick.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yes. It depends on what? For those who put green, what does it depend on? The escrow agreement. Whatever that escrow agreement says is where it goes. It's not all the same. Awesome. I feel more validated now.
It's clear it doesn't go to the owners. Okay. Project cash, R for R, depends on. Okay. Easy Sub, Indigo Montoya, EML, SMO. Okay. A bit of a reshuffling. Oh, and it's spreading out. Look at that. Spreading out. All right. We move on. Borrowers are required to prepare an analysis of the R for R account. How often? New regulatory agreement. How often? Well, most of you got every 10 years. It said right in there, every 10 years, an analysis of what? How it was used in the prior years, and then also a look towards the future, all right? So that's what it says, all right? Not 7, not 3, not 5, but 10. All right, let's see where we're going here. Okay, a little reshuffling there. We into Matrix, they're back. Again, starting to spread out. Okay. Halfway through, 7 to 15. Penalties are generally required to be paid by whom? Management company, owner, project. Depends on the penalty. Oh, that's a tricky one.
Peter said it too. Peter said it out loud.
Owner. Pretty good. Okay. Depends on the penalty. Well, the regulatory agreement says penalties are the responsibility of the owner. So there we go. All right, let's see how we go here. The owner. All right. Ooh, Indigo Montoya. Indigo Montoya must have a couple, has one of those streaks going, because you get bonus points for the streaks. KP, Rip City R climbs into third place, 7 or 11, and 7 out. Uh-oh. Okay.
We just get our money and leave.
7 or 11. All right. Number 8, surplus calculation would not include 4 good answers, one of which is actually correct.
Consider that answer not to be maybe never. Literally not.
Not only not, but never. Okay.
R for R, deposits and transmit. S13030 has a line for that.
Right.
It's one of the things listed. MIP is a 14 agreement. Insurance proceeds is again S13030 if possible. TARS, absolutely never. So.
Rip City R moving up, CRR new on the board, Easy Sub, SMO back on the board. But look how it tightened up. It was up to 1,500 as the spread, now it's back down to 9. Item number 9. which extremely arid, what is often produced in the Mojave with the help of diverted water. These are products. Some are fruits. Some are grains. While extremely arid, alfalfa. Oh, okay. Well, most people knew that. They're up on their Mojave Desert plants, animals. Let's see what we did here. Ooh. New at the top. CRRSMO and JT. JT new on the board. Haven't seen them before. All right, and all right, back to a 1600s. All right, so a lead of approximately 400. Number 10, surplus cash may not be taken until after the first annual true false.
Mid-year calculations. Purchases of projects with maybe 3 calculate. You know, at the end of the year, you're going to have 2 calculations before the audit's over.
That's right. Yeah, like on a stub, you have the
Yep.
stub, and you take it for the stub, and then it's not an audit yet. So, yeah, that is permitted. REAC permits that. HUD permits that. Let's see how well we did on that, with most people being in the wrong column. All right, Rip City, okay, 400. That looks like the scores. No, that's interesting.
Tightened up.
It tightened up, but the first 2, those are the same scores as the prior screen.
Yep. They missed it.
So did the SMO.
Which of the following would not prevent surplus cash distributions? Would not prevent.
Think of those other 2 on the left as being consistently not done. But they're specifically mentioned in the regulatory agreement.
Right, that is. That one is. That one, right. Unfiled REAC submission. All right. So unmowed lawn and trash not picked up, that was specifically mentioned about services to the project. It specifically mentioned that on a continuing basis. The physical inspection below 60, that gets to what? Good repair and condition, and we know if there's a most recent pass inspection is below 60, if it's a fail, there should not be a distribution. However, for unfiled REAC submission, that's not one of the categories. That's not one of the reasons.
What's going on here?
I don't know. But it came in second, and that's the right one. Oh, yeah.
By the way, if the previous answer was true about audit, the next question had to be essentially the same one, because an audit would be followed with an unfiled REAC submission, which would not prevent surplus cash distributions again.
Right.
We're just losing. It's blank, 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 blank. I don't know.
Is it?
Yeah, it just went blank over there too. Okay.
All right, new leader on the board, new leader. Putting together some win streaks here, because the other folks are kind of static, if you will. Okay. Which one's this? Number 12, question number 12. Which of the following is not a HUD description of waste? Oops.
Oh, come on.
Okay. Not in the HUD description. Remember, we went over waste, one of the definitions. It gives a lot of examples. So which one is not there? Right. Disposes of excess product is not in the HUD description of waste. Disposes excess product.
It is excess for a reason, right?
Right.
The other 3 are all specifically mentioned.
Yeah, there's several line items there under. It says any of these are considered waste. Okay, so 16 got it right, and that was the minimal. We in the matrix still there. Okay, wow.
We're getting close now. We're getting. Come on, baby. Come on.
Ooh, what's that?
We in the
80
Matrix, go, go, go.
That's, 16 and 23 is 39.
See,
so
now they both
39
went off.
points. 13, question number 13. One of the biggest changes as a result of the new agreement is increased distribution limitations, stricter R for R requirements, allowance for certain nonprofits.
Remember
to
that,
get
that red one doesn't say changes in surplus cash. It says distribution limitations changes.
changes in accounting for advances. So what is allowance for certain nonprofits to get distributions? Right. So we mentioned that up front.
Somehow this always gets
We mentioned that up
competitive,
front.
doesn't
And okay, most of you got it. Very good.
it?
Most
Pressure.
of you's got it.
No, pressure would be everybody has to hold up their phone with if it's red or green. That's pressure.
CRR, ooh. 300, 250,
Oh.
spread to 250.
Der
Anybody
Bingle
else?
shows up too.
Okay.
Two more questions.
Der Bingle,
And
wow.
one of them is going to be about the Mojave Desert. You can already guess. Think we know where that's going.
Which of the following is not true? Security deposits must. Which is not true?
One of those is conditional on state comments, but if the state does have it, it's a mandatory thing. But one of those is clearly not a must. In the regulatory agreement, security deposits do not have to be collected. It just simply says if you collect them, the asset must exceed a liability. If the state requires that you better pay interest, and the account must be separate in the name of the project.
Right. All right, still there. Hasn't
You
changed.
did lose that one, huh?
Okay. I don't think there was any move on that at all.
I don't think so. It's all down in the Mojave Desert now.
The highest point in the Mojave Desert, nearly 12,000 feet, but Death Valley lies at what? Oh, what is the, oh, how many feet below, was it sea level? I should know this. I went there last year. It's very low. $282. Oh, my.
You're still on the board?
All right. Ready for the big reveal? There we go.
Okay. Peter, help me hand out some moolah
I will.
here.
Speaker requirements. Speaker requirements. Okay. All right. So we finished up with the regulatory agreement and the quiz thereon with winners and others who came in someplace past fifth. We won't call you losers, but you just better luck next time. There will be next times. All right. Moving along, changing the subject a little bit. Let me see, let me see where we went. We got the regulatory agreement. Now we're going to talk about REAC and the review process and HUD audit guide and so forth. New regulatory agreement, copy of regulatory agreement. There we go. There we go. All right. We understand that there's currently four computation of surplus cash calculations. We have the old way under the old regulatory agreement, the new one with all the extra stuff. And then we have two for nursing homes, the nursing home old and the nursing home new. Okay. Nursing home old and new. All right, so we know that there are four calculations depending upon the type of client. And again, depending upon what? Which regulatory agreement they are subject to. So it's not about, a calculation of surplus cash. It's which agreement did they sign, what is permitted, what is required. So it's, the one you want to look at, the one they should be doing, depends on which regulatory agreement they signed. All right, so, it kind of gets back to that. Ownership. Okay, let's talk about change in ownership. So under change in ownership, MOR, That is a management operating review done by HUD, or in the old days, the contractor. Have the principals and board members listed received their HUD 2530 approval? 2530 approval. All right, so here's the deal. In general, so we said that HUD, since it's taking on all the risk in these projects, as the insurer, as the lender, HUD always wants to know who are the folks that they're doing business with. Can they be trusted? Who are the partners in this organization? Who are the signers of the firm commitment? What entities? What individuals? All right? So what HUD does, it wants to look at and do as much due diligence as it can when getting into bed with new partners, right? So that's the deal. Because HUD is taking on partners who can do good or bad to the project, know how to treat project cash or fritter it away on unallowed stuff. So HUD says, we want to make sure that whoever we're taking on and taking on the risk, that we know them as well as we can. And so the whole idea is they want to see how much they know under due diligence about what they call the new people coming in. And so they have this thing called the previous participation review, because once you get a HUD project, then HUD keeps track of you and keeps track of the project and whether you played by the rules and whether you played nice in the sandbox, all right? So this is all about, so this HUD 2530 approval is previous participation. So in other projects, did you play nice? Did you follow the rules? Did you follow the regulatory agreement? Did you keep the project up physically? Did you pay attention to the maintenance? Did you file your REAC submissions and so forth and so on? What were the outstanding findings in any audit, in those audit reports that were filed on an annual basis, if in fact they filed them? Under the audit guide, it says, this gets back to the encumbrances, not without prior written consent of HUD, convey, assign, transfer, right, any part of the project. So it says recent changes in the 2530, the APPS process, and APPS stands for Active Participant Performance System, I think, process have been reduced the number of individuals required to file changes in APPS. So the idea is, I think it was the Housing Notice 2016-14, HUD reduced the number of people that it has to look at when there's changes of ownership. And what they want to reduce it to is just the folks that signed the firm commitment, the individuals or the organizations that signed the firm commitment. So they put out they put out some guidance, all right, on this. We will talk about that in the future. All right, let's go to the next. Protecting the project, DEC referral flags. This goes back to the old days. So, when DEC was invented, back at the same time as the Real Estate Assessment Center, there were a number of flags, compliance issues, really, referral, that got referred to the DEC. You see them there. There's 1, 2, 4, there's 8 of them. Mortgage status, R for R. So that's what? That's the project itself. That's the physical piece of the project, right? Unauthorized change in project ownership, disposal of project assets, distribution of project assets, loans from project funds, which are always unauthorized, underfunded security deposits, and commingling. Numbers 7 and 8, not that big. The other ones are serious stuff because they threaten what? Either the project cash or the bricks and mortar, or even ownership. And the change in ownership, it's like HUD always wants to know who they're dealing with. HUD always wants to know who's putting them at risk, who could do bad things to the project. So the idea was that if any of these were compliance findings, they got referred to the DEC. Now, the idea where there's dollar amounts involved, such as mortgage status and reserve for replacement, is if there was a delinquency in the payments of a certain amount. then it went over to the deck. If it was a minor amount, then what? The REAC, or actually, the HUD field office and the project manager tried to resolve it. But when you get down to distributions, unauthorized loans, those were dollar amounts. And the dollar amounts were, give or take, is $10,000, give or take, as a threshold. So if it was a big, bad distribution, say of 10 or 15 or 20 or above, then that flew right over to the deck, and then the deck took action against the owner, all right? So the whole idea of these compliance flags was, it was risk-based, obviously, but HUD did want to basically protect bricks and mortar, cash, other assets of the project. So that's where those came from. But they all flowed out of what? The REAC assessment. What else we got here? Back to that, and we move on. So now a little bit about REAC. We'll move through these quickly as we can. Remember this one? It's been around a long time. But it's good because it illustrates what HUD's whole thing was in looking at the completed year at a project. So this is your process. It starts upstairs, up there, upper left-hand corner. That's you with the audited financial statements, delivering them, okay? And it ends here with after the findings. So there's a field office, that's the deck, so forth and so on. But we want to concentrate really right here. Submission to REAC, assessments produced. It's all about, and this is Les's phrase, not mine, but Les's phrase, but it works, looking for leakage. Leakage of the cash, all right? What happened to the project cash? The assessment is all about what happened to the project cash, all right? All about that. Those are your compliance issues. The other thing that goes on here, so we understand all the compliance findings come out of the assessment produced, but let me just add, the other thing that comes out are some financial indicators. And these are financial indicators such as what's the current ratio, current ratio, what's the vacancy rate, what's happening year to year on the operating expenses. These are measures, if you will, that regardless of whether HUD's involved or not, from a real estate, from a multifamily point of view, you'd want to know. And it says, how is the property performing? Or even, how's the management agent performing? So HUD does measure these things. There's like 6 or 8, and I can't remember them all, but it's current ratio, operating expenses, vacancy rate, tenant accounts receivable, things like that, all right? They are measured internally. You can't see them, your client can't see them, HUD folks can see them. They're measured internally, and your clients come up with a kind of red, yellow, green scoring system. A lot of the REAC scoring is red, yellow, green, all right? So that's what happens, and that information is then pushed out to the field office so they can use it to manage the property. So the assessments come out, and then the compliance findings go this way. The gold cup means it was a clean report, there were no findings. Down here, our clown face means there's some issues to be resolved. It goes to the FAS analyst. The FAS analyst then looks at the findings, see if they really are findings, or if there's other information contained in the submission that does away with the finding. If there's still findings, the minor findings go up to the field office for resolution. The deck referral flags, this is my estimation of what the deck looks like, okay? Well, no, see, in the beginning, all the folks working in the deck were attorneys. So, that's how that evolved. And then what happens is there's somehow some communication with your client because there needs to be resolution. These things need to be resolved, all right? So that's the flow, if you will. Been around a long time, but that's the flow. Let's see, financial and compliance issues down here. Let me just see what I wrote in the margins here. Financial indicators, tenant accounts receivable, vacancy percentage, operating expense, what's that doing, quick ratio. And yeah, a lot of them are, management indicators. All right. Continuing with the fast multifamily, a couple of slides that just gives you some idea of what the outcome is in general. So you see the array of what happens to the review results. 43% are okay, closed by the system. 19 additional percent have no findings, and they're closed by the fast analysts, the REAC analysts. 30% go to multifamily program center because there's minor compliance findings that the field office has to take care of. And then finally, 8% of the submissions are in fact referred to the deck. Now that's pretty good. I remember early days of REAC, if they hit 10% or less of really troubled properties or submissions, whether it was on the physical side or the financial side, then they thought they were doing okay, because if it gets more than 10%, they require so much attention that it would really, bog down, excuse me, whatever staff was there. So that's cool. And those were probably some early stats, but I think they've held on. Most popular compliance flags. At the end of a submission period at Fast Multifamily, we could run the stats and figure out for all the submissions that had been done that year, where were the popular compliance flags? How many did we get? And this was the order of finish time after time after time. And I thought, wow, that's really incredible. It always comes out the same. And then someone pointed out to me, well, of course, that's where the money is. Why wouldn't it be that way? The most popular thing is money leaks out of the project. Unauthorized distributions, unauthorized loans. We'll get to the others in a minute. But failure to make R for R, acquisition of liabilities, and so forth. So that, year after year, maybe 6 and 7 would switch positions, but the order of finish was pretty much consistent from year to year. Let's see, where are we going here? Back to that. Let's take a look at this. This is where we want to talk about, we're still in REAC. So, submissions come into the Real Estate Assessment Center, they go through the system identifies findings, and then presents it to the REAC analysts in Fast Multifamily for them to, research, go over, review, and then they actually determine whether it's a finding or not a finding, and if it is a finding, is it serious, or is it like, need deck referral. So what you're looking at is kind of like the inbox for whichever analyst had Baltimore. All right, so we see 3 projects up there, and we will look at each of the projects separately. But we want to concentrate on what's being reported into the system by the auditor, because there is that, the auditor says, well, I had findings this type or that type or no findings, right? And then the system, even though the auditor has duly reported, faithfully reported the findings and named them and coded them, the system is doing that as well. So when an analyst is looking at a submission after it's been run through the system, after its assessment, it may be looking at 2 completely different sets of findings from the same submission. How can both of those things be true? Don't know. All right, so let's see where we go. So this is Mountain Green Housing. Now, a couple things to note. Upper right-hand corner, we see our submission data. We see it was a 2000 HUD audit, so this is a for-profit, 2000-04 HUD audit guide. It's not a co-op. The from date, beginning of the year to somewhere almost mid-year. So to me, this looks like the property was what? Sold, or at least has new ownership coming through. This is a partial year submission. We're not going to actually make a judgment on this, because since it's a partial year submission, that's why we're not going to make a judgment. But what we see here is we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 findings. that were picked up by what? The system. The system identified these findings when it did its assessment. What we see under auditor-generated column is blank. So the auditor did not identify any findings, all right? So how can we have this? How can this be that the system thought there was findings, including something here, unauthorized loans from project funds, that qualifies for DEC referral, all right? So the analyst would then kind of look at this. Now, the trick here, and maybe the catch, is that this, in fact, might be the final submission for this particular ownership group, since it appears to me they sold the project. All right? Because it says the end date for this submission was June 28th, and the FY date is the 12/31. So I just want to point out the difference. So the auditor did not identify any findings. Maybe they thought that since it was the final audit, that HUD didn't care, right? Or maybe they just got it wrong. Or maybe they thought if they didn't report any findings, then HUD wouldn't be any the wiser. We don't know. We don't know who this person is. Or at least based on what's here, we don't know who it is. We don't know the submitting firm, all right? But this, just to show you what this looks like, okay? Let's see what's next. All right, so this is Canyon Terrace, and so this is a not-for-profit, full year. So we see up here it's a not-for-profit under old A133. We see a full year submission, all right? And here we see auditor-generated findings. That's good. We got 1, 2, 3. That's good. That's good. And then the system generated 1, 2, 3. And actually, the auditor, picked up. So the auditor says 1, 2, 3, 4. That's good. Over here, the auditor says, if I can find the pointer. There we go. The auditor says, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So it says, we've got a residual receipts deposit. Okay, they probably didn't make the deposit timely or not at all. Also an issue with deposits down here for reserve for replacement. And it looks like it was not at all or significantly deficient. And then these two up here, they named as other. So remember when we were looking at our most popular findings, in third position was something called other. So other does, in this case, we will think the worst of the audit firm and say that they knew what was going on, but they decided to report it as other and not actually give it a name. Whereas the fast multifamily system identified it as 1, an unauthorized loan from project funds, and 2, an unauthorized distribution. All right? Those are pretty simple. They should pretty much plain on the face. If you identify that, if you see that, it's pretty, it's pretty easy to tell what's going on. So the thought here will go one of two ways. A, it was an error. B, it wasn't intentional. It could have been an error if, and I remember Les saying this, in the heat of the battle, the submission was handed off to an intern to complete, and the intern was confused about what the findings really were, and not knowing anything else, and in the heat of battle didn't want to ask anybody what it really was, so they just plugged in other and sent it off, and it passed it passed validation, so off it went. So error. The other side of the equation could be it was intentional. The auditor thought, I know what these things really are, but I don't want to say that my client made an unauthorized distribution and furthermore made an unauthorized loan. So I'll mark them as other. I've met my reporting responsibility. I found some non-compliance, but I'll just say it was other, and no one will be any the wiser. Well, the system knows, and the system identifies it, and it presents this to what? The REAC analyst. And then they go through their protocol and they identify, was it really an unauthorized distribution? Was there really an unauthorized loan? And then they go about their business if that's the truth. So that's just, just to show you how the system works and what happens. So we don't want to think necessarily ill of the auditor, but maybe. And let's see, one more. This is an A133. It's a co-op, all right? It's a co-op, and this looks like a first submission up here because it starts on June 8th and it runs through the end of the fiscal year, all right? And here, okay, the auditor did not pick up on anything, and yet the system says failure to make mortgage payments, acquisition of liabilities, encumbering, and then unauthorized loans. So we're not sure what's going on here, whether the auditor did not understand, what their job was, or it has something to do with, it could have something to do with it being a co-op, who knows, all right? But this is what comes in to the Real Estate Assessment Center, just so you get an idea of what they are looking at and what they do and, what their responsibilities are, just to kind of, all right, you do the submission, it's how HUD determines, and remember, back to the picture of the castle, if you were an auditor, they're standing on the drawbridge, so you're an important part of the picture. All right, let's jump over. So once things roll out of the Real Estate Assessment Center and Fast Multifamily, they go over to the field office, and then the field office gets a hold of the submission, and it says when they get it, they could perform a regulatory review and email a letter to the owner requesting corrective action in 30 days, and that's normally what they do. If they see findings that they're responsible for, they reach out to the owner and say, all right, what's going on? Corrective action. And they have access to what? The corrective action plan, they have access to the management letter, all that good stuff. So they get the schedule of findings. They have access to the entire reporting package, right? And they also have access to the review done by the Real Estate Assessment Center. They would also have access and be not only to the compliance issues, but they also get to look at what? That some of those financial indicators that talk about how well or not well the project is doing, so they can see, oh, it's red, it's yellow, it's green, so they get that. Then it says they also perform a more comprehensive review and could request corrective actions and or documentation. Whether they have time for this more comprehensive review, I guess that's up to workflow, what's going on in the particular field office, that type of thing. Purpose of the field office, the top bullet there, we know that goes on. The second bullet, whether they get to those more comprehensive reviews and getting in touch with the owner on something more than just compliance issues, kind of up to the field office and what their workflow looks like, or by and large, I think a lot of it hinges on what the field office director is interested in. All right, let's see. Purpose of field office review. Determine if the project has complied with HUD requirements, terms of the mortgage. Also check for diversion of project assets and assess the project's past performance and future needs. So I think this is where some of those compliance, not only the compliance findings, but those financial indicators come into play. So obviously diversion of project assets, that would be a compliance issue, but the past performance and future needs, that's where we get into some of those financial indicators. Let's see what else we got. Oh, here's some of the things that obviously they're interested in. So these are, they came from some other slideshow that was done for field offices. But you can see the accounts that they're interested in. This should not surprise anybody. Payables, receivables, vacancies, bad debt. Okay, here's where some of those indicators come in. Miscellaneous expenses. All right. Then they finally get down to the notes in the auditor's report. I want to move ahead to, these are obviously compliance issues, security deposits, reserves. More compliance issues, payables, receivables, liabilities. Unauthorized loans, loans or advances to the owner. Okay, so these are all compliance issues. Clearly prohibited by the regulatory agreement. All right, so this is where some of that management data or financial indicators that have to do with how good the management agent is doing, or possibly the physical state of the project, all right? Losses due to apartment vacancies and rental concessions, so this is a management agent issue, all right? Bad debt write-offs due to poor rent collection, excessive tenant accounts receivable due to poor rent collection. Vacancies may also be due to what? Poor physical condition, poor curb appeal. So this is kind of a measure, if you will, that HUD gets, and since HUD is not going out to every project on an annual basis, some sort of idea as to management agent capabilities. So, just wanted to share with you some of what's out there. And, how some of that data that comes in, what happens to it, how it's used by HUD. Miscellaneous expenses, things that they look at, things that they pay attention to. And from the REAC template, when the REAC template forces you to enter and submit some of those detailed accounts, what are they looking at? Okay, how are they used? Looking at cash flow. The bottom bullet, excuse me, HUD may require owner to submit monthly accounting reports and expense management and process EMPIPs if a project does not generate sufficient cash flow. The monthly accounting reports and the occupancy reports and these monthly reports that come in typically from HUD's standpoint are put in place on new projects that are new, just getting off the ground, so HUD doesn't have to wait that long to more or less check the pulse of these things. Or if HUD has determined that they are a troubled project, and whatever, however they measured, if they've determined that the project is a troubled project, then they often will put that troubled project on monthly reporting, all right? So just the ways that HUD operates. Yes, sir. Ma'am, excuse me.
Way to determine the benchmark that REAC HUD is using as a measurement for project performance?
Is there a way to determine what are REAC's benchmarks?
Yes.
No. There's no. It's part of the secret sauce. That's the way it would explain to me. And they actually measure. I remember that all projects, depending upon the type that they are. So a 221D4 is measured different than some other project as to, okay, what's a good vacancy, what's a good vacancy rate, or what's an acceptable vacancy rate. So what's a green versus a yellow versus a red? It differs depending upon the project, the program type. But other than this, and there's no place that's not published anywhere, and the formula they use to go through all the machinations, those are not published anywhere either. It's a secret.
My experience is that based on my client portfolio, bad debts in Louisiana are generally higher than bad debt expense on Texas properties, but that's just based on what I see. But I have no way of knowing how HUD is measuring performance against whatever they're measuring to know whether I'm in the ballpark or not.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, HUD doesn't publish like a standard, and we'll even get back to reasonable expenses. It's like if HUD said, okay, in this region, not necessarily Louisiana versus Texas, but we'll say for Region 6, they used to be called Region 6. I'm not sure what they are now, but what's a good amount for heating or landscaping, again, depending on what property size and so forth and so on. So that stuff is not out there. You're shooting in the dark, yes, ma'am. Does HUD require our reports on all projects? The monthly activity reports, are they required on all projects? No. HUD only requires the monthly accounting report, or they used to be called the ABC reports on from my experience, two types of projects. New projects, so they can see how it's going early on, and they don't have to wait, 15 months for the audit from, the starting date of the project. Or if a project has been judged by HUD to be troubled, right, for whatever reason, then they want to get like a monthly look-see at that project to see how it's doing. Are they moving along? Are they correcting whatever the problems are? So, or sometimes, all right, so Sandy says sometimes, and that makes sense because, and if it's new ownership, new management, then that would mean, to them, that would be a new project.
Don't have a whole lot of experience with a new management agent, or there's something that makes them a little concerned about what the operations are,
Okay.
then it's at their discretion.
All right, so Sandy says that it's, this is Sandy, okay. Sandy says if it's a new owner, or if they don't have a lot, or an agent, or they don't have a lot of experience with them, right? Then they will, put them on a short leash. This is HUD's version of putting that project, that agent, that management agent group on a short leash. But how do they know that? When there is a change in ownership, we're not going to fast forward to that, but when there's a change in ownership, HUD does its due diligence and says, okay, who are the new folks coming in? Who are the new signers? Who are we really relying on? And we'll talk about, according to the new housing notice, who those people really are that HUD wants to focus on. And by doing that due diligence, if they say we have no experience with these folks, then I would want a short leash, all right? So, okay. But a good question, so thank you. Let's see, I think we're going to slide over here to, back to that. Now on to, okay, a little audit guide stuff. We'll talk a little audit guide stuff here. Audit scope and approach. It's all about the financial statement. All right. Do enough work to permit an expression of opinion on financial statements, and any in relation to opinion, follow generally accepted auditing standards, and always obtain a mandatory sufficient understanding of internal control to determine nature, timing, and extent. Okay. Minimum following AUC section 315. And then GAGAS adds on, the yellow book adds on its own internal control reporting requirement. But yeah, for the audit guide, it's mandatory testing of internal control. Gain that understanding. Gain the understanding. Audit scope and approach. It's a compliance audit, an opinion on each major program. A major program in multifamily is at least $500,000 in federal financial assistance. Major programs, if it's a lender, FHA lender, this is the audit guide in general, not just in Chapter 3, but for Ginnie Mae and FHA lenders. Testing internal control over compliance, demonstrate your understanding. Should perform tests of control over compliance regardless of the assessment of control risk, and then be able to show that that was done clearly in the documentation. And the other note is HUD does not separate out internal control over the financials. HUD just takes it all in one. All right, on to HUD Audit Guide Chapter 2. Audit Guide Chapter 2 is about reporting. Regardless of the type of audit you are doing under the audit guide, it's about reporting. Hard copy report might be required by some program offices, but primarily multifamily reporting will be electronic in nature. Required reports are IPA report on financials and supplemental data, internal control and compliance in accordance with the yellow book, and a report on compliance on each major program and internal control over compliance. So those are the pieces that are being called for by Chapter 2. Let's see where we want to delve into. Oh, other required reports. Required reports on what? Schedule of findings, question, cost, and recommendation. All right, a management letter. The management letter is a required part of the submission for HUD. So, findings, question, costs, and recommendations. You, as an auditor, that is your responsibility. Management letter, your responsibility. The next one down, schedule a status of prior audit findings, question, costs, and recommendation. That is your client's responsibility. Corrective action plan is also your client's responsibility. Then it says what? Probably means that a report reference must be made on the prior audit findings and the corrective action plan schedules, if you put them in there, and they are required. Corrective action plan, and the schedule, well, let me see, there's slides that are going to detail this stuff even more. So, all right, hang in there, we're going.
Peter, one more comment. Just remember on corrective action plan, what we talked about yesterday was single audit. Lender, PHA, anything in uniform guidance. The only place where we're not getting that corrective action plan on letterhead is really multifamily for-profit. RD, they didn't talk about it too much yesterday, but they're going to be looking at corrective action plans. Okay. You're going to want to be sure those are really by the client, and I think it's just by far best practice to ensure that you have evidence that that corrective action plan has been assumed and they've taken responsibility for at management side. And one of the best ways to do that is to get it on letterhead. Okay. And I just can't overstate that enough now. Multifamily HUD's not going to see it, I get it, but you want somewhere where that is in evidence that they've taken responsibility for that. When we get after lunch and talk about independence, preparing a corrective action plan is an accepted non-audit service with management participation risk. The only one of the few ways to mitigate that is, again, prove they've approved it, and one of those ways is in client letterhead again. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Your report on the financial statements, report conforms to clarified audit standards, what's in Chapter 2, because the IG's office accepted what the AICPA sent over, and we don't refer to the IPA report for each major program, okay? It's not, since it's not a component of the financial audit. IPA report for the Yellow Book. Okay, focus on financial statements only, report significant deficiencies and material weaknesses, and internal control over financial reporting, fraud, material noncompliance, having a material effect. Next one is IPA report on compliance. Report on compliance limited to those things $500,000 and over. Anything below is not audited, so no audit report on there. Requires an opinion on compliance covering the internal control over compliance, reporting on significant deficiencies and material weakness, always talking about identifying them in the body of the report. Then you report findings, what? With the auditee response. So that's in there as well. The example that Les puts out shows a table describing compliance areas tested. While he says this is optional, he believes that it is the best way and should be utilized to be clear on what was tested. Don't always say, oh, we tested everything. That could get you into some big trouble. You don't want to do that. So there's a report on compliance. I have a note here that says RD now requires that non-material non-compliance issues need to be reported in writing. So that kind of mirrors what HUD does with its management letter. Let's talk somewhat about findings now, how those are reported, all the good information that HUD wants to pick up on findings. So we have this thing called Schedule of Findings, Question, Costs, and Recommendations. And it says it's included regardless of finding status. So if you have findings, yeah, you fill it out and you include it. But if there's no findings, you have to make a statement at the top that says, we didn't identify anything that needs to be reported. This is HUD's way of saying, we don't trust you. Well, no, I know this from this has always been the way. HUD says, we're afraid, and this gets back to the IG's office, we're afraid that they're not going to include some findings. And unless we question them on it individually, and if we did and there were findings, they go, oh, damn, I forgot. I meant to put that in there, but I forgot. So by saying it's mandatory to put it in there, either describing the findings or saying, no, there wasn't anything, you're still making a statement that, no, there wasn't anything. All right, so that is why it is. See, a positive statement that no findings were reported. It's arranged in two components. And so this is where you take a stand to say, here's the corrective actions not started or in process, or here's the corrective actions completed. So you're taking a stand. You as auditor are taking a stand saying, yep, they've completed these. These are great. These they haven't started or they're still in process. So who's ever doing audit resolution, the HUD project manager, the HUD account executive, they can look at it and know that I've got 2 corrected, they're all cool, but I got 2 that are still in process. So that's what I have to follow up on. There is no gray area here. It either is or it isn't. Is or isn't. So take a stand, make that determination. Findings are to be included in all required components, regardless of status. So even those corrected. What are the components? Condition, cost, criteria, effect, and recommendation. So the 5 components or the 5 attributes of an audit finding as determined long, long ago by the General Accounting Office or the Governmental Accountability Office, as they are now named. Don't delay the report issuance to enable correction of findings. Whatever it is, it is. Please get the report in on time. I don't think we have a slide on report due dates, but we know what they are, 90 days after the close of the fiscal year. And for the last couple years, HUD hasn't had to extend that date. God bless them. They haven't had to extend. More details, drilling down in the details. All right, you can read the top bullet about group project-based sample findings. Required components, you see what they are. List out the question costs. Information on universe and population size, sample size info, number of instances of noncompliance. Stop right there. Stop right there. Let me find my additional notes on this stuff. So we have the idea of known question cost and likely question cost and all that entails. And what's reported, if it's bigger than this, if it's greater than that, if the likelies are this on a major program, if the likelies are that on a non-major program. By putting in this information on universe and population size, sample size, all right, so our population attendant files was X, we pulled a sample of Y, the number of instances of noncompliance was Z. And so HUD has collected this information for a very long time, all right? Uniform guidance talks about, and before that, A133 talked about collecting this. This puts the finding into proper perspective, rather than just say there was an issue. How big was it? How important is it? So this helps explain known versus likely and so forth and so on. So just, talking about that, expanding on it a little bit. The next is our 5 attributes of the audit finding. And then finally, reporting reviews of responsible officials. So that's part of the schedule of findings and question cost, all right? Reporting the reviews of responsible officials. Management letter, we understand this. Reporting what? Non-material non-compliance, if required. And this is, remember, Chapter 2 says this, if you're doing multifamily audits, okay, then the management letter is required. And once again, why is that? Because HUD doesn't trust you. HUD says, we're afraid auditors are going to report major stuff as part of the management letter, thinking that in the old days you didn't have to submit the management letter. But we're going to get it now. And so, again, they thought, they didn't trust CPAs. They said CPA would put something big in a management letter. Hopefully it wouldn't be seen, and yet they would still have met their reporting requirement. So please understand that's why the management letters, at least on Chapter 3, are part of required submission. Not to be used for material noncompliance. Okay, we get that. Auditor's report should mention that there's a management letter. Not to be used to report corrected material noncompliance. Again, that goes where? Schedule of findings and question cost. Prior audit findings, this is what? Your client's responsibility. Address all findings in prior years, include findings from audits, attestations, studies, or reviews. Remember that this thing got expanded, okay, in Chapter 2. So, an MOR that was done and had issues, you report those findings there. The pass inspection, if the contract, Section 8 contract administrator came through and they had findings on some of the tenant files they looked at, all of these things are meant to be gathered in and reported on as well. There's one more, and I can't remember. I'll have to ask Les what it was. There's one more because he mentioned it. I think he mentioned it yesterday. Does anybody remember what that was? There was one more, like an outside review that was done. Can't remember. And requires a positive statement that no findings were reported, if that's the case. Corrective action plan, prepared for each finding, separate from the report packages and views of responsible officials. There is obviously a template in there in the Audit Guide, Chapter 2. It's important that you describe the corrective action, including the tasks and subtasks and the dates for the planned action, and then also who is responsible for that. It's the treasurer, it's the CFO, it's this person, that person. And then express agreement or disagreement with the finding and recommendations. And then finally, equity skimming. Number one risk to HUD is equity skimming. The most, from HUD's standpoint, and hopefully you got this by now, the individual or individuals that they are most suspect of at a project is the owner, because they have access to the money. All right? So that's what this is all about. How did they take it? How did they take it? How much did they take? So that's HUD's number one risk. So on fraud and equity skimming, the first bullet there is our working definition of equity skimming, willful misuse. For reporting purposes, you do follow the yellow book. You take it up the chain and you report it as necessary. You stay within the governance of the organization. If they fail to communicate to an external party, auditors should then report directly and communicate with the single audit coordinator for HUD. All right, so remember, that's been around a long, long time. All right, let's see, where are we going next? Oh, okay. Okay. Now we get to the business on change of ownership. All right, other key issues. Change of ownership, project management. Okay, let's see. We'll do change of ownership, we'll do project management. That may be as far as we get, we'll see. And then we got a Kahoot to work in there as well. All right, so let's talk about change in ownership. Wow. All right. The top there gives us the reference to the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200, Subpart H. You can see when the new rule was issued in 2016, and so I think there was a HUD notice that kind of got spread out, but it's also incorporated into the Code of Federal Regulations. So it says, an apps review, and again, this is looking to see what this, whoever this participant is, what is their record of performance? How have they done? So it says now is required for any change in controlling participants. All right, here's the essence of this. The apps review prior to this new rule was required for almost everything and everybody, even the little guys. What this does is it narrows down, and they want to look at just controlling participants. So then they had to define controlling participants. So we'll look at that. And what do controlling participants do? And what's a triggering event of when you have to look at these new people, all right? So it says it's required for any change in a controlling participant. We see the new rule issued. If you wanted to look at this, you could Google it. You could, I did it yesterday. You can put in 24 CFR Part 200 Subpart H. It'll pop right up. Controlling participants, one, are serving in a specified capacity. So in this new rule, it tells you what those are. And they are entities or individuals in control of a specified capacity. But the gist of this is anybody that can control financial activities or operating activities, right? They're the people that HUD wants to take a look at. So we see the list of specified capacities there. So it's an owner of a covered project, a borrower, could be the same, obviously, right, of a covered, a management agent, a Section 232 operator, or a Section 232 tenant. So owner, borrower, okay, so those are strictly like the 223s, the 221Ds. Then we add in some extra stuff for 232. So we see who those folks are. All right, and the owner, borrower, agent, operator, master tenant, believe me, they are all controlling participants. All right, let's see what else we got. There we go. All right, so it says specified capacity, but if you look in that part, that CFR, Part 200, you look under dot 216, all of these folks, and this chart is actually there in 216. All right, it says, if any of these folks changed, if so, then HUD wants to know about it, and HUD wants to run all these people through previous participation and check on, again, how they've operated in the past. Did they play according to the rules, or did they not report? Did they, constant, be in a position of there's findings and so forth and so on. All right, so borrower, so we see, okay, down the left-hand side, we got the people, across the top, we got the programs, all right? Kind of simple, you see who they are, all right, very nice. And again, this thing is in section 200.216. So the idea is, when they name participants, they said they classified some folks as controlling participants, and then they said, and we're excluding others. So they're controlling participants. You see the nature of their activity. Day-to-day activities, owning more than 25% of the entity, officers, managing members, GPs, including administrative GPs, if what? They're exercising day-to-day. GPs, exec directors, controlling stockholders. The ability to direct the entity to enter into a triggering event. So they have enough sway that whatever that triggering event is, all right, they have the ability to move them into that. Trustees of a trust, and so forth and so on. And then what does it say? For the insured project, persons listed in the regulatory agreement non-recourse debt section, which was that section 50, the last thing in the regulatory agreement. So if those individuals are named there, all right, as being not responsible for debt, but responsible for what? Monies that come into their hands, or what else was in there? Or actually changes of ownership and so forth, all right? And then also encumbering the project, those folks definitely are considered controlling participants. So those who are excluded are passive investors, individuals not exercising financial or operational control, all right? Officers, nonprofit board members, mortgagees acting in that capacity as a mortgagee, nursing home administrators, and that is PHAs. The S is just part of the plural, PHAs, all right? So they are all excluded participants from that. So then what are our triggering events? All right. So at the beginning of a project, application for FHA insurance, application for HUD funds for any program administered by the Office of Housing. So to me, that would include what? Section 8, right? Oh, here it is, a request to change any controlling participant. So owners, agents, those folks in day-to-day control, financial control, operational control, all right? Request to consent to assign a Section 8 HAP, and my understanding, if there was a non-insured property that had a Section 8 contract, if that gets sold, then the contract has to get assigned. So we have a new owner, and obviously HUD would want to look at what their record, if they had a previous record with HUD, and that it says may also require with a loan sale or some other disposition, okay? So what are triggering events? So a triggering event, a controlling participant, these are when HUD says we want to get into the 2530, or actually they stopped calling it 2530, but they are calling it, we want to check the entity's previous participation. So now we'd say, once all that's determined, what's the nature of the review? So it says HUD will review the previous participation of the participant. They don't do a review if it's an inheritance issue or a court decree. Applicants have to identify the controlling participants, and then it talks about what's the basis for disapproval. And so HUD would disapprove, and so there's you'll see over the next couple pages, we talk about different types of disapproval and for various reasons. But HUD will always disapprove if the individual has been suspended or debarred, already suspended or debarred, materially restricted if it represents a risk to HUD, or they have a record of past participations of items of risk, and there may be some mitigating circumstances that will overcome and allow HUD to approve them, but we'll see how this works. So let me see what we got here. Revealed risk, and so the idea is that they want to look at the participants to see if they're going to reveal any risk that they represent to HUD. And it says, a disapproved participant may request reconsideration by a review committee after the process gets started. This is all contained in HUD Notice 2016-15. So 2016-14 talked about previous participation, and this is 2016-15. There are 3 levels, if you will, of flag issue. Obviously, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. And it says the top tier represents what? Evaluated risk, significant long-term risk. So we'll take a look. All right, so these represent permanent flags. So look at some of these. The flag type: mortgage assignment, FHA claim, property disposition, mortgagee in possession, deed in lieu of foreclosure. So this is bad stuff, okay? Bad stuff. So it says the reason, and it says the duration of the flag. And the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 says permanent flag with the asterisk. The asterisk means that due to some other circumstances, HUD may remove the flag, all right? HUD may remove the flag. Then we go down to the bottom 4, if you will. So We start with limited denial of participation. Limited denial of participation. This is sort of like being suspended, but you're only suspended from some stuff. But it is permanent. Suspension or debarment, it is permanent. And this tells you the reasons. That's wonderful, permanent. Voluntary abstention or exclusion, current or past. It's a permanent flag. Voluntary exclusion. I remember running into these. The people that I was most familiar with that got suspended or debarred were CPAs, because QAS did it. They found bad enough stuff after a QAS review, they did work to get suspension or debarment. And that looked bad on the permanent record of a CPA. So then they gave the CPA firms an out. You could voluntarily exclude yourself from doing HUD business. And it wasn't a suspension, it wasn't a debarment. You just kind of retired from, I say you, nobody in this room, of course. But the CPA just kind of voluntarily retired from doing HUD business. So that was considered, I wish I didn't do that. Let's go back, please. One more. There you go. So voluntary exclusion. And then finally, conviction of fraud or embezzlement. Again, a permanent flag. All right, so those are the permanent flags. Let's see what Tier 2 looks like. And these are things that happen with inside kind of REAC, all right? Or REAC would know about them. And then as you read them, repeated failure to file the annual financial statements, financial default 60 days late on the mortgage, unacceptable physical condition, unauthorized distributions, repeated unresolved audit findings. So those are the items. And then it tells you repeated failure to file AFS. 3 or more occurrences within what? A 7-year period. So if you were really late on the I say you, if your client was really late on the filing 3 or more times, then that would be a Tier 2. And then it says it is retained for 5 consecutive filings. So if they do good work after a time and within 5 consecutive filings, it will go away. All right, so these can be corrected over time. So each of these, it tells you what it is that they did and how long it stays. And they all stay for 5 years. They all have like a 5-year.
Peter, that late filing, I think, is really, you'll see it based on the next screen. It's clarifying, but it's after the 30-day letter expires.
So
this late filing here is letting that go that far.
right.
So I'm just trying to explain to everybody, it's not this one, because this one here is Tier 3, and that's just after the 10-day grace period.
Right.
So the other slide, Tier 2, is after the 30-day letter has expired.
And remember, the way to correct the non-filing is just file the thing. Just send it in. Okay, it's not complicated. You don't have to call and ask permission. I keep saying you, your client. Okay. What else we got? Physical condition, most recent score below 60, an additional below 60 for the last 7 years. Okay. Again,
now,
what
Peter,
it is and when they're removed.
The other thing here about physical condition that's interesting to me is we can't take a distribution to go below 60, but that's only a Tier 3 flag here. I mean, on Tier 2, you had to go below 30 or below 60 twice. I mean, think about that for a minute. And when you think on this slide, you haven't read it yet, but one incident of unauthorized distributions, where the other side, it is more than once. Physical condition score below 60 is only considered as serious as one unauthorized distribution within 5 years. So unauthorized distributions are really weighted heavily here, aren't they, Peter?
Yes, they are. That is the queen mother of all compliance issues with HUD, unauthorized distributions. Just to jump back to Tier 2, common type, these are just common type of compliance violations, nothing, no suspension, no debarment, all that stuff. They all have a 5-year life. And then when you get to these, again, common, they just didn't happen as often, that's all. But again, common, and then What did you say about why do these things hang around? Why does it matter? These are, oh, repeated infractions.
Repeat offenders.
Repeat offenders, they can always look back to prior findings.
And by the way, these findings attach to owners and management companies.
Yeah.
Peter, do you mind if I tell a little
Again,
story here about this?
Controlling participants.
Yeah, controlling the Section 50 signers.
That's right.
So I got to just tell you a little story here about why, you know, it sounds interesting to have somebody explain this, but you're going, why do I care? Look, here's the story. And Peter heard me tell this story here. It happened actually a year ago, but I didn't realize why until I went back to this. Owner has 3 mortgages. It's a cool little project in Denver. Has a first, a second, and a third. The first is a HUD guaranteed mortgage. The second is a home fund loan from the city of Denver. They're both payable from project operations. The third mortgage is home fund loan payable from surplus cash. Year 1, no surplus cash. The management agent pays $6,300 on the third mortgage. Auditor walks in. Finding, right? That was easy. Reports the finding. So theoretically, he's got a tier 3 flag. It went away at repayment. Or, that's supposed to be sorry. The Prezi designer hasn't got back to fix that. So you think it's gone away. I've repaid. The next year, there's $200,000 in surplus cash. Owner takes the deferred developer fee to the tune of $200,000. What did the management company do again? $6,800 on the third mortgage. Auditor walks in and goes, another finding. Owner repays. Now, everybody feels like you're safe, sound, and secure because we've repaid. Both loans, the project's made whole, no big deal. The next year, the owner says, hey, come out a little early and look and see what old Joe's doing over there, right? What does he find again? No surplus cash. $7,400 of third mortgage payment, and now the guillotine falls down on the management company and says, you are cut off. We're firing you. What did that virtually guarantee? It virtually guaranteed late filing. Owner intends to repay, by the way. Now, this problem is that once it went to late and got that tier 2 flag, DEC picked it up. It's a tickler. All of a sudden, DEC got tickled, and they started to laugh and look at that file. So they see late filing, but what did they see? 3 consecutive misbehaviors on overdistribution, 2 of which have been repaid. 1 repayment is pending. Here's the solution to consistent misbehavior. $40,000 of civil money penalties times the 4 events. It's $160K. Well, that's when you call Les. Oh, Les, help me. What's a normal? But here's the question. They know they're going to pay. I know the CPA really well, and nobody understands what's going on. They say, what's a typical settlement? I said 3 to 5. Write your check, 12 to 20. Smile, sign. Owner's going to pay, right? And then you go sue the management company or whatever you want to do. I don't care, but the owner's going to pay. So HUD comes back and says, oh, this is DEC. So HUD comes back and says, well, you know, you're right. We will negotiate. And we're feeling really magnanimous today, so here's it is. Best and final, $80,000. That's where we're going to settle this today. Now, the owner's not writing a check for $80,000. So his mind is starting to work on, I'm going to prepay the mortgage. I'm done with HUD. What does HUD say? Great, try to prepay it. We won't let you prepay it. Title company won't take the payment. Until when? You pay us the $80,000. Okay? Now, luckily, this is not the first rodeo. And I've got the documents, and I say there's no prepayment requirement. So HUD cannot stop you from prepaying the mortgage. So later, we finally ultimately get out of that prepayment. He does prepay the mortgage, but what did they tell him? You're going to have to settle with DEC. And he says to me, what's going to happen if I don't pay the $80,000? You'll have a permanent flag on your record forever, but they can't come and collect from you now that you're out of HUD. And what does he say? That the chances are really small, Les, like molecularly small, that I will ever come back. In fact, I don't think I would ever be considered to come back to this sideshow again.
Operation.
Okay? Operation. So here's my point. Everybody's wondering why so aggressive, right? Now, obviously, the person at Dex got a little bone to hold on to here. But they think they've got him. But the point is, the flags were the driver. We have no clue how that was working. The owner's going, I paid all the money back. Well, and that's what the CPAs in the crowd are going. We paid the money back. Project's not harmed. Oh, no. You're a misbehaving child. If the child consistently misbehaves, if the kids follow the parents, well, we're the parents now. We're going to punish you. So, look, you never know. Had the management company, or had he had multiple projects under here, he was going to pay, wasn't he, John? These flags last a long time. So, look, I know this is not the auditor's problem, but when they have consistent misbehavior, the one thing that comes up over and over again is, oh, Les, you guys are overstating the risk. They're never going to punish me until they do. And it almost always comes back within a few years. So just warn them. Consistent misbehavior is being tracked. And the minute it tricks, that's whatever that magic moment is in the secret sauce, Peter, right? Yep. Here they come. Civil money penalties now start at 50 grand. That's the new limit. Yeah. So anyway, sorry.
All right.
It's just, that's why this conversation is important, because the only people paying attention in general are in the room here. Okay? It's the crowd.
I'm going to go into management agents. Okay, but all right. So the next thing is project management. We're going to talk about. Don't run off, Les. Why are we covering We're going to cover management agents and what's in the handbook, and how they collect, not how they collect their fees, but what their fees are based on, and expenses, and whether it's a frontline expense and where it gets charged. This type of expense gets charged here. That type of expense gets charged there. But we are going over this because
peer review. And I don't mean AICPA peer review. I mean HUD-QAS review. And they start with a peer review checklist with their own stuff. So QAS walks out to 2 fairly significant firms doing many numbers of projects. And I've trained at these firms for 15 years, do good work. They're serious people. And QAS comes out of there with 3 findings. The first one I really just disagree with, because it's you got to go test some fair housing. And they both produced a letter from OIG, George or Jim Heist,
okay,
saying we don't anticipate testing on fair housing to continue, and they just threw that letter in the trash. So, literally, I mean, that was what they said. We don't care. George is gone. Who cares about George?
And it's still in the audit guide.
It's still in the audit guide.
There's still stuff in the audit guide.
It's not our fault. Nobody updated the audit guide. So I don't really care about that comment, but they hit them on management functions. It was not the management fee, by the way. The management fee, that's analytical review. They got them in how they're allocating costs. 2 things, how they were procured and how they were following guidelines from 4381.5 on spreading costs among projects. Oh, I started paying attention now. Now, why did the firm make that mistake? Tons of cash disbursement testing. It's just not mentioned in the HUD audit guide. But it's really clear in the handbook.
Extremely clear.
Extremely clear. And so they called them and said, Les, when you do training this, they called, well, here's what we're getting hit on. I said, oh, you're going to take a hit on this thing. I can tell you it's wrong right from the start. You don't even have to talk to me anymore. I can tell you right now, here's the section, blah, blah, blah. I can quote it. It's bad, and you're going to take a hit. And they're sad about that. But, they're just going, we didn't even know, right? And so we just thought we'd go through those things. That's why. And if we don't get it now, before lunch, we'll finish it after. We got a little time. We're flexible.
What do you want to do?
Start it.
You want to start it?
Well, I don't know if they're ready yet.
Oh, okay.
They're probably really close. In fact, if you want to go, we can probably go now. Mike, Michaela, do you think they're close? They're ready? Okay.
No, she's just going to take a look. She's checking.
They're going to be ready. They were ready 20 minutes before yesterday. So.
They're ready? Okay, they're
Okay.
ready. All right, so all right, we're back for the afternoon. Excuse me, a continuation of session number 7. And so the key word for session number 7 one of the Beatles, of course. The key word was Ringo. All right, so Ringo. Make sure you mark that down so when you're back in the comfort of wherever you will be, you will have that with you and be able to fill out what you need to fill out. So, okay, let's get. All right, so we're going to talk about management agents, and we're going to cover where do the fees come from. So we will talk about the fees and HUD guidance on what it says about where they collect their fees and what goes into the fees and what is excluded from their fee computation. And then we will cover expenses that are a direct charge against the project and those that must be covered by the management fee. So that's what we want to talk about going forward, and then we will have a Kahoot quiz. Hey, Les, do you want me to cover EIV, the slides on EIV, or not? No. Good, thank you. I would just soon not. They're in the book. I don't know if they're on the Kahoot quiz or not.
We're going to cover some of it. I told we would do risk assessment on the tenant files. I would do it from these slides today.
Oh, I'll just leave this.
We'll just leave it there.
Just leave it there. That's it. We're going to leave it there. Okay. Moving forward. Agent expenses, are they correct? So that becomes the question. Agent expenses, are they correct? And Les told you the Quas story about and the expenses, and Quas looked at them. And so the idea here is to pay attention to the management agreement, not on what you assume to be correct, not pay attention to what's in the chapter 3 on management functions, all right, but also the management agreement. And what does that say? What does it permit? What does it allow?
Technically, we should probably do that now.
Okay, technically, the next key word is, what are these, chemicals or something? All right. All right, chemicals, let me see. Let me just read over your shoulder, please. Sure. Oh, yeah. Elements. You don't see kryptonite in there. No, the key word is sodium. Sodium. Key word is sodium. So, again, pay attention to what the agreement says, the thing that's signed by HUD. HUD's agreed to, okay, and what's in there when looking at what the management agent is taking for themselves and where the costs are, what they're being charged to. Okay, and through this, I will reference, at least going through the fee part, I will reference the various handbook sections, and we're talking essentially about the management agent handbook. Can anybody tell me what the management agent handbook number is? Please, HUD handbook 4, 3.
Well, you're getting a lot of response.
I know.
It's lunch coma.
I know. 8, 1.5. Thank you, sir. Extra credit for that gentleman in the back. 4381.5. And the fees are detailed in what's allowable in the fees, as we will see in Chapter 3. And when then they talk about what's chargeable to the project and so forth and so on, we jump over to Chapter 6. So I'm not going to show you pieces of Chapter 3, but I will show you pieces of Chapter 6. All right, so management fees come from residential rents, commercial rents, miscellaneous charges. Then we also have things called specials and add-ons. And so in the management fees, the rents are based on income collected, And the specials and add-ons are on a per unit charge. And we think of things, at least in the old days, like bookkeeping fees, and it was X per unit per month. And what we used to call computing or IT fees, X per unit per month. So those were our add-ons. And so they would all be listed out in the management agreement. If they were there, all well and good. If they're not there, forget it. You can't get it. That's it. Many agreements are miscellaneous only as an oversight, so just be aware of that. All right, moving forward then. Residential, all right? What qualifies for fees? So we have our do count, do not count. We can see them up there. Let me see what this says. Okay. Rents, do count, rents, co-op carrying charges, rent sump payments, RAP payments, Section 8 regular tenant assistance, including utility allowance whose total tenant payment is less than utility allowance. Do not include the special claims under Section 8. You can see the 4 that are there. Excess rent and charges for Section 236 when it's greater than the basic rent, and the Section 236 IRPs, all right? So those are not counted. And that's the detail from Chapter 3, Section 3, paragraph 3.3. 3.3 for that one. What's next? No, we're supposed to move forward here. Come on. All right, do count. Rent from commercial space, parking fees, charges collected for additional services, whatever they might be. All right, not counting charges for services paid to an outside vendor. All right, not providing that service. So whatever those charges are, we're not counting those. All right. Still in 3.3. Nope, now we're up to 3.4. All right, so this is 3.4. Now we're up to Section 3.5. Do count laundry, other concession income, tenant charges, resident charges, loss of rent insurance policies, pet fees, furniture, equipment, other charges on the rent schedule. So any of the rental fees for those, so we are counting those. All right, not counting interest on security deposits. Okay. Section 8 special claims, flex sub, property tax refunds, property damage, proceeds, recovered legal fees, court costs, R for R, and residual receipts disbursements. So none of that. So, all right, clear guidance on what you do and what you don't. All right, so we've seen this one. We're back to that, and now we're jumping ahead to cap yield fees, and these are in Section 3.9. And so it says that significant rent increases, and what is this, over, how much is it? A rent increase of more than 20%. So if that happens, there it says fee yield would be limited to a rent allowed under 20% rent increase using current management fees. And so it is, so when the rents go up by that much, the HUD regs in 3.9 of the management agent handbook kind of cap what they can get. Cap what they can get. I think it's 20% in 1 year. It's like, okay, it was here and then it increased. So and the idea is if you keep moving forward with the same percentage, say 6%, not 6, but we'll say 3.5 or something like that, then it obviously jumps up. So what HUD does is say, all right, we're capping the yield to the management agent. So the rents go up, the percentage is going down. So it does get capped. So just be aware of that. And that guidance is in 3.9. Yes,
yeah,
sir?
and I think I don't know whether I misunderstood the question or not, but the issue isn't how much rent increases. I mean, if that goes up, rent can go up over 20%. But they're just saying we will not allow your fee yield to go up beyond an increase of what 20% in rent would give you. So if rent went up 30, you're going to only get a management fee increase to 20%. No, this is kind of how HUD does it. So HUD says, look, we're going to give you an increase in rent. It might go up 35% in some places. I mean, we're seeing rents change significantly. So then they're going to say, okay, well, it will only allow you to get a fee yield equal to 20% of that rent increase. So when they go up, well, you have to kind of see the form.
Yeah.
He'll get to the form in a minute.
And it is in, it's in 3.9 of that chapter. I have it here. That's 6. Well, let me get that up anyway. It's right there. Yeah, here we go. Three.
No, we're talking
One time, I thought.
we're talking a one-time rent increase. So you come in and get a rent increase. Typically, something happens and it causes that rent increase to go up that much. Some significant change in the neighborhood or something, right? I mean, maybe you're in New York City. I don't know. And some of this rent just goes really up fast. I mean, if you look at PHA and you're looking at vouchers, we have some places where it's astronomical. The fee increases are going. So HUD's just said in multifamily, the rent needs to go up, that's fine, but we're only going to allow you to get a management fee for so much of that.
Sometimes we could get retro.
Yeah, you can get retro and all that, but they're just saying, if you come in to get a fee increase, the rules are typically stating to the field office, we're going to cap your fee yield. If the rent increase goes up over a 20% management fee, I mean, a 20% increase in rent, we're not going to allow, say it goes to 35, we're only going to allow you to get a management fee increase equal to the 20% of rent increase. What you would have yielded normal management fee at 20% more rent. And all they do is, when he gets to the form, it might be easier just to go to the form, the 9839.
Oh.
Oh, there it was right there. You just went up.
Did I?
It's right here. I think this is it.
Cap fee percentage.
Yeah, the B.
B. When a project will receive a rent increase equal to 20% or more of its current rent potential, management fee percentages must be adjusted. Figure 3-6 illustrates when an owner requests for a rent increase affects the residential management fee percentage. Let me go down to that. Okay, so effect of a rent management. Owner requests, ranges do not apply. If the increase is 20% or less of, okay, if the increase is greater than 20% of the current rent potential, calculate the fee yield using the current fee percentage and net rent potential for a 20% increase. Adjust the management fee percentage by dividing the calculated yield on the new rent, okay, rent potential. Use the new fee percentage in future rent increases. So a 20% increase to rent potential. That's what they're talking about. All right. I think it's applicable.
Typically, it's clearly always going to apply to Section 8. Okay, you just take that off the table right there. But if HUD on a market rent property, it's probably going to apply the same way. It's not asking whether or not you're Section 8 on the form. It's just saying, if we're going to, but here's the problem. See, in most of these cases, HUD doesn't approve your rent schedule. And if that's the case, you're probably going to not have to do as much of that as if you are, HUD is approving your rent schedule, right? Because HUD has no say over what you charge. And typically, they don't get too excited about your yield because they don't care. If there's no restriction on distributions, I mean, other than surplus cash, but you're a market rent property, why get too involved in that? But they may. See, they have some latitude on some of these things. It's not clear in the handbook, but it's not saying you must do this for market rent, one for Section 8. It just says, here's what happens when we have a fee increase. And the form, the actual form, when we get to the form, you'll see it in a second. It's.
Is it in here?
The form?
Yeah.
No, it's, did you open the 98, you didn't open it, the 9839? It's in your files, I think. in your folder.
You think? I don't think so.
Yeah, I thought it was. Oh, you didn't have it?
No.
We can plug mine in. Hang on.
Okay.
2018 update. There we go. I'm really just scared to do anything with my computer. His works so much better. Wrong one. Management.
All right, well, let me move on while you're,
Here it is.
okay. Want to do this?
Yeah, let's just do this. Cross our fingers.
There it is.
So only if HUD decides to get involved in this, and it's really hard to get this thing up to the right level. So it just says, if we're going to cap you, and the cap is if we're going to approve an increase in the management fee of a significant amount, HUD has the ability to elect to cap your fee yield. And all they're going to say is, look at that form, it's capped at X PUPM. Each time you approve a rent increase, adjust the percentage, the management fee percentage to maintain the yield. And of course, the yield was calculated down below. So what really changes here is that your gross potential rent goes up. They give you a 95%, but the yield here is $2,003. Let's say they wanted to maintain your yield at $2,003 a month. They would just adjust the percentage against the new GPR to give you a new yield calculation percentage.
But that's only if that box is marked.
That's only if that box is marked. If that box is not marked, this whole calculation is irrelevant, right? So as auditors, I tell everybody you got two analytical review steps. Gross potential, or rent collected times the first page rate. In this case, it's 378. The person who sent this to me was confused because the first page is 378, but this last calculation is 383. Why are they different? I said, I don't care. You pay 378 up to the yield, but in her case, it's not marked, so we don't care. So they always fill the form out, but only matters if they've decided to cap you. And in most market rent properties, I don't think we're going to see the cap marked very often. You know, I don't know there's a hard and fast rule about when it would. They just said, oh, I approved a rent increase. Well, if I market rent, are they really approving my rent? Which is a no. So I wouldn't expect it all that often. This is probably more of a Section 8 or 202, 811 kind of a thing. But there's no rule in the handbook that says exactly when or when not that occurs, okay? Does that make sense? And that's why people get confused, and you're exactly right. You just go to this page, check, no check, I don't care. All I got is one analytical review, rent collected times the rate, compare it to the total, this is over. If I got a second with a cap, I just take the rent I collected, or I just calculated, divide it by unit months, and I compare to the yield. Am I yes or no again? And that's all there is for us as auditors. It's that simple. 2 analytical reviews. And all I need to know is whether you've checked, the HUD checked the fee yield line. Okay? We don't really have a lot of problem in this area, frankly. This isn't where they got caught with trouble. Oh, let's go back.
Reverse the steps. Okay, good. All right. All right, now on to assigning management costs. While you're digesting what the slide says, all right, so the important thing is salaries for frontline activities on shared projects must be prorated in proportion to actual use. Could be what? On units, based on units. What other methods are there for allocating? Units?
Oh, it depends on what it is.
Okay.
We've seen things here for maintenance. It could be on work order.
Okay, work order.
It could be units still, but units is a little dodgy because you don't know if we're comparable units. It's like reasonable cost.
Okay.
Some are newer, some are older, some have more maintenance, some are,
bigger,
senior
smaller,
versus family.
yeah. Okay.
All that.
All right. The important thing is the kind of the sub-bullets. No surcharges are permitted, and projects may make reimbursement payments to the management company. Recovery of fringes must be prorated as well. And then I want to get over to 46. I want to get to chapter 6 here.
Now, by the way, on that screen, you see one thing that said no, what did it say? No surcharges. Here we had a project or a management company, like 100 projects. Hugh walked in from Quas. They were allocating payroll to each project at 104. Whatever payroll is, they were charging a 4% admin fee. The hammer fell on this management company, and they're still arguing to this day. I think I've seen some of the folks that I've asked them, hey, did they, as the client kind of come around? Because they're slowly having to come around because it's really clear in the handbook. And HUD's going, look, adjust or face DEC or OIG. You're surcharging. You cannot do that. And it was right in the work papers. The firm didn't know it was wrong. Why? Well, a couple of years, nobody's reading the handbooks all the time. I get it, and it's not in the HUD audit guide. And then they walk right in and say, oh, surcharging, that was easy. How many projects are you auditing for these guys? 94. Oh, I think we're going to be unhappy with you. Oops. Those are classic examples where the tool let me down, and we could argue the HUD audit guide let me down. And they're probably going to say, safe harbor, I didn't have to do this. Well, that's not what the HUD audit guide says. HUD audit guide is different. They said if there's something in the guide we should have mentioned that we didn't mention, you're responsible for it. Single audit, I may not have to do that.
All right, so in assigning management costs, this is a copy, of, obviously, from the handbook, paragraph 6.37. HUD allows auditors to charge certain management costs to the project's operating account. However, other costs may be paid only out of the management fee. The assignment of these costs is discussed in 38 and 39, all right? The management cost of the project must be paid out of distributions to asset management costs. So the asset management cost, all right? Paid out of distributions to the owner. The assignment of asset management costs, well, a description of where that is in 41.
Peter, one more comment here that, just to tie in what you said earlier about reasonable expenses. Yeah. So everybody knows the regulatory agreement. Peter said this isn't comparing project A to B to C to D. I mean, this is about whether the costs are front line. Are the costs reasonable and necessary to the project? And this is the second place where the firm got whacked. Well, two firms in particular. They said, are these costs reasonable and necessary for the project? And what they're really asking is, are these allowable? So reasonable and necessary is really down to one thing. Do these relate to this project, and are they meeting the criteria of 638 and 639? It's less than 6 pages of handbook total, and half of it's in tables.
Yeah, it's tables. That's why I like to show it, because it's a table. So you go, you find it, and you go, okay, here it is, it's okay. Here it is, it's not okay.
And that's what they were asking for in cash disbursement testing. Was this a reasonable and necessary expense of the project? That's all the regulatory agreement says over and over again, and that really didn't mean comparison. It meant, were these legit costs under 638 and 639? RD does it that way because they're going to say, look, you have to have these, we're going to ask you to test cash disbursements in lines 1 through 10 and 19 through 32. That's what the guide's going to say. So they're saying, I want to look at repairs and maintenance, and I want to look at miscellaneous admin, because that's where the risk is, especially if I'm IOI, if I get identities of interest. That's all HUD's really saying here. Were these costs frontline allowed costs under those 2 paragraphs?
Frontline, no supervisory, no surcharge.
And that's covered in the 2 paragraphs,
Got it.
right? Yes, sir.
Is management agent allowed to charge the overseeing of big capital projects like a roof replacement or big renovations?
We'll come to that in a second. Okay? He's going to look at the tables for you. I'll answer that while we're kind of going.
Yeah, go ahead.
In general, we're going to ask the question, is it part of the management fee or is it the asset management fee? Now, a lot of other entities get that charged as part of asset management, which in HUD's world is only paid from surplus cash. So they're what you're really looking for are add-ons. So you say, I have something coming up, and HUD will approve lots. I mean, some field offices have schedules listing up to 10 add-ons they will approve. I've seen them for market rate conditions. I've seen them for, much like public housing, or some of them. I could probably kind of find a couple of field office memos where they list up to 10. They might approve other things for you. If you're going to do other projects, they will approve add-on fees. But they might not be chargeable under the residential management fee. So you'd have, if you're starting to approve other things, you have to get some approval for some of those fees, okay?
All right, so HUD defines the frontline costs in section 638, but it's, taking application, screening, certifying, maintenance, accounting for project income and expenses, and doing the management operations review. They basically look at, and I think, what is it, question 40 or something like that. They say, all right, who are all the frontline staff charged in the project? So HUD, says at one point they will look, if HUD comes out, they will look at it specifically. That's what they do. Yes, question 40, and so they go through and list them all out. Frontline costs, day-to-day activities. You see them right there. So that's where the slide came from. Then we go down to 6-2, and there it is. Cost paid from the fee, cost paid from project account. So you can go right down and see what's what. Now let's see what's up there. Selection and establishment of the accounting system, internal management controls, visits to spot check performances of on-site, fidelity bond coverage, bookkeeping expenses attributable to the agent's company. All right, so that's from the fee and what comes out of the project account. Let's deal with that. Sorry, I got flipped over here. Costs related to maintaining a centralized or project-based accounting functions, fidelity bond coverage, frontline employees, principal management staff, costs of frontline project ops, managers in their apartments, legal, auditing, so forth and so on, but it's reasonable brokerage fees, travel expenses. So these are all allowable, chargeable to the project. Dedicated line, fax. Now we go over to the fee, management fee, directing the investment of project funds, overhead expenses, agents' travel expenses, agents' phone office line not dedicated to tracks. So it gets very, very, very detailed. All right? So that's in 6.38. Let me see if there's anything. Oh, comes out of the fee, recruiting costs of agent staff, including roving staff members, direct charge to the project, recruiting costs for on-site staff. So some common sense there. And it goes on, and you have it in the text. And it covers what? Agent staff performing frontline functions. So good direction, training costs. Still in 638. All right. Shared frontline functions. If the activity is performed out of a single office, agent must prorate costs according to the use of services, no flat charges, allocate salaries and fringe, actual office expenses, fees, and the like, attributable to frontline activities. Salaries of supervisory personnel may not be charged. All right, so never ever do we get a charge for supervisory going to a direct charge to the project. If the staff performing front lines may bill a project directly, actual time spent, if each of the conditions are met, no supervisory salaries. It must be supported by job descriptions, charge at a reasonable rate, and then document the hours on frontline activities. And my note here says weekly timesheets are okay for that purpose. Items paid from the fee, non-frontline activities except for centralized computer and accounting, salaries and fringes, office expenses, fees, contract costs. For the following items, you can see what those are. Another slide on that. Salaries of supervisors must be paid from the fee unless, so you can see what the exceptions are or the conditions. Salary for employee designated to replace a direct employee may be paid out of project funds after the first 40 hours. And we see the conditions on that. Can work for up to 90 days. See what it says over in 6.39. So explanation of costs paid from the management fee, probably very similar to the slides. So HUD gives lots of guidance on this stuff. All right, lots of guidance. You've got the table, you've got text on this, and that's what you should be auditing to. All right, not what you assume. Between that and the management agreement, that's where you should be going.
I didn't find anything specific to what you're saying about projects. If any owners had a problem getting paid for supervising construction and such as that, do you know? You know, I've gone through here, it doesn't actually mention it, but what it did say, I've found 5 or 6 different add-on fee schedules for certain things, homeless. I've got small projects, group homes, high density, remote location, scattered site, adverse neighborhood, ownership type, special clientele, a co-op, subsidy projects get a certain add-on. These are Section 8. Special fees for project conditions that are temporary in nature, which is where I think you're going to get that from. And so it doesn't really say one way or another that I could do that, but if you start charging certain things in gray areas, that's where they're going to look, and they're just they even say here, we're looking at your financial statements to see if you're trying to increase management fees to find another way to get around surplus cash. And I think those are your risk areas. So how much will they look at it? How much is it? And the other side is, I mean, I can see some of these places will up to 10 add-on fees that may be approved in certain circumstances, but mostly they want them to be temporary for a time period.
I had a client who had a major rehab project, and they were allowed to charge a construction management fee.
Okay.
Because this was a non-recurring event.
There you go. I think that's what I'm really looking for, is that particular instance.
Yeah, it sounds like she got it pre-approved.
And it was, oh yeah, it's pre-approved.
Yeah.
Definitely fire.
All right, I've got one more on project maintenance, and then we'll stop. Okay? Okay. And then we'll play a quiz. Project maintenance from the HUD audit guide under management functions. Determine whether the project is maintained good repair and condition. If the units are subsidized, determine whether management's procedures ensure that the units meet applicable HQS housing quality standards. And for that, it's like, are they inspecting? What do their inspection protocol look like? How many times a year are they going out? So forth and so on, right? And then another thing is, it says, best action of you is to look for client controls. Indicate below to confirm that there is a schedule for preventive maintenance / servicing for the items listed that are applicable. And the other item is, it was mentioned at one point that if the occupancy rate is suffering, it could be due to maintenance issues, so maybe they aren't as up to snuff as they might be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, here's what we talked to a lot of people in the management company world. I've had people tell me they'll do quarterly inspections. I thought that was a little excessive.
That is.
I've had somebody tell me they did them semi-annual, and they said if the tenant complains, don't sign the lease because it's right in the lease. We're going to inspect you every 6 months. Housekeeping inspection, we're going to come right in, at least a minimum of a year. I'm telling you, that's the whole key to your maintenance test. The audit guide says do some procedures to make sure the client is maintaining the unit appropriately. Yeah. Well, let me get right to that, right? I'm going to go walk the site. Yeah, that's what will Lane know? Hey, it's a building. This is typically found in tenant files or a maintenance file. They have it, it's there. You ask. Some of this stuff can be tested so quickly that it's easy to get evidence, okay? They all do it. They all do it. It's in their policies to do it. And typically in the lease.